Chapter 674. Hearing the soldier's report, Yili was stunned for a while. It was not until Emo Xiuyao raised his hand to touch her that she came back to her senses. Li. Emo Xiuyao looked down at his calm wife in his arms and frowned slightly. Yili shook her head and sighed softly. After Zhu Yan's death, another old general committed suicide in front of her. Rationally and emotionally she could understand their choice. Because if it were her she would not surrender to the enemy. The two old generals were loyal to the West Hill all their lives, and they died to protect their reputation. Whether it was the enemy or friend, they could only respect their strength of character. But Yili faintly felt that she could not stand it anymore. Perhaps she had seen too many deaths these days. Lili, what's wrong with you? Are you not feeling well? Emo Xiuyao asked worriedly as he supported her. Let's go back first, we can talk about other things tomorrow. Yili held his hand and shook her head. She smiled reassuringly and said, I'm fine, we don't have much time to stay in Bian City. Pass down my order, bury General Longyang with the general's rights. Just bury him with General Zhu Yan. Emo Xiuyao nodded and ordered, do as Princess said. Go. The soldier took the order and left. Emo Xiuyao waved his hand to let the people behind him leave. Holding Yili's hand, he walked slowly with one hand on her waist and whispered, Longyang and Zhu Yan are dead, Lili is sad? Yili shook her head and said, I don't know what's wrong, maybe the two old generals are too old. They are over 70 years old, but it's inevitable that they feel a little emotional. Emo Xiuyao whispered, if Lili is sad, stay in the army and don't worry about these things. Yili smiled and said, does Prince really think that I am a delicate flower that cannot be blown by the wind? No matter what, the two old generals were loyal to the country. Now that they're dead, Emo Xiuyao said, do you think I'll bother with the dead? If Mr. Li said to give him a grand funeral, then he would give him a grand funeral. Lili, don't be sad for others, okay? Hearing Emo Xiuyao's low voice, Yili raised her head to look at his eyes. She couldn't help but smile. She raised her hand and gently touched his slightly furrowed brows. In this world, you, little Bao, grandfather and uncle are the most important people to me. Apart from you, no one can truly make me sad. So Xiuyao, you must do well. Of course I will. Little Bao. I will protect all the people Lili likes. I will definitely not make Lili sad. So, Lili, don't pay attention to those irrelevant people, okay? Emo Xiuyao said in a low voice. Yili blinked. She looked at Emo Xiuyao seriously and raised her eyebrows. Irrelevant people? Isn't Lili sad about Zhu Ling's death? Emo Xiuyao asked in a low voice. But Yili could still hear the anger in his voice when he said Zhu Ling's name. Zhu Ling ah. Yili sighed softly and said, I just feel that he is still very young. Also, my plan this time is not very open and above board. Of course, she knew that this was not all. Yili was not someone who was slow in her emotions. She understood Zhu Ling's feelings. However, not to mention that she and Zhu Ling had only just met, not to mention their positions. In Yili's heart, there would never be another man more important than Emo Xiuyao. From the beginning, it was destined that this was impossible. She felt guilty because of Zhu Ling, not because she had any feelings for Zhu Ling. It was purely because she had let down a sincere heart. But there was no need to let Emo Xiuyao know about the rest. Between husband and wife, it wasn't wrong to occasionally lie with white intentions. They didn't do anything wrong. If he saw any flaws, he would have killed Li. Emo Xiuyao ground his teeth and said, but they can't do these things secretly anymore. What if something happens? If you really need women, you can just have Qin Feng and the others train a few. I know. Yili silently rolled her eyes. She knew it would be like this. After confirming that Yili seriously agreed, Emo Xiuyao nodded in satisfaction. He held Yili's hand and walked forward. Mr. Xiuding lived on Dragon Mountain, east of the city. Because Dragon Mountain Academy was temporarily sealed off by the Mahist army, some teachers and students who didn't have time to escape were temporarily placed in a small courtyard outside Dragon Mountain Academy. Although the Mahist army was full of soldiers, they respected scholars. Since Emo Xiuyao didn't make things difficult for these people, the soldiers who were ordered to guard the academy naturally wouldn't make things difficult for them. When they arrived at the entrance of the courtyard, they unexpectedly saw a familiar face. Third brother, why are you here? The person guarding the courtyard was Su Qingfeng. With Su Qingfeng's status as the commander of Qi Lin's squad and his relationship with the Su family and the Prince Ding mansion, It was a waste of talent to let him guard this place. No one in the Mahist army would let him do this kind of thing. The only possibility was that Su Qingfeng asked to come here. Su Qingfeng was very happy to see Yi Li. He smiled and said, "Isn't Dragon Mountain Academy one of the 3 great academies in the world? I've heard a lot about it, so I came to take a look." Yi Li gently shook her head and smiled. She didn't expose him. Su Qingfeng was raised by the Su family and also studied at Dragon Mountain Academy for a few years. However, he had always practiced martial arts and hated sitting in front of a desk to read and write articles. He didn't even attend the imperial examinations. If he was interested in meeting the teachers of Dragon Mountain Academy, he would rather believe that his eldest cousin would get married tomorrow. After thinking about it, Yi Li also understood Su Qingfeng's thoughts. He definitely didn't agree with Emo Shuyao killing those people, but he definitely couldn't persuade Emo Shuyao. So he could only ignore it. Although Su Qingfeng didn't like to read, he was still from the Su family. His respect for scholars was no less than that of anyone in the Su family. With him guarding here, no one dared to cause trouble. "How is Mr. Xiaoting?" Yi Li asked with a smile. Su Qingfeng shook his head helplessly and pointed inside, indicating for her to take a look. Yi Li didn't care. He pulled Emo Shuyao inside. This small courtyard wasn't very big. It was only a courtyard with 2 entrances. The style was somewhat exquisite and elegant in the style of Jiangnan in Dechu State. He didn't know why the Longshan Academy had built such an independent courtyard. Before she stepped into the courtyard, she could hear the sound of reading coming from inside. However, the content of the reading made her not know whether to laugh or cry. It was all mocking the Mahist army and Prince Ding. Yi Li and Emo Shuyao stood at the door and silently listened. They didn't go in to disturb him. They saw the person sitting in the courtyard with his back to the door, reading one poem after another. For someone like Yi Li who didn't know much about poetry, to be able to read so many similar poems without repeating them, if it wasn't for the wrong time and place, she would have worshipped him as a god. When he read something like, "Ambition for the throne, blood flows in Bian City," Yi Li finally coughed and said with a smile, "Mr. Xiaoting is really in a good mood." Chapter 675. The person sitting with his back to the door was startled and then turned to look at the door. Realization flashed in his eyes. Prince Ding? Princess Ding? It was only then that Yi Li saw Mr. Xiaoting's appearance clearly. He was an old man with white hair and beard. His appearance was thin, and his temperament was elegant with a bit of the loftiness and arrogance of a scholar. He did not look like someone from the West Hill but more like a scholar from the South. Yi Li pulled Emo Shuyao into the courtyard and nodded with a smile. "Yes, Junior Yi Li greets Mr. Xiaoting." Qin Xiufu looked Yi Li up and down and snorted. "I can't be called a junior by Princess Ding." Yi Li did not get angry and smiled. "Mr. Xiaoting is very talented. Even my grandfather and uncle have a lot of respect for you. It is natural for me to call you a junior." Hearing this, Qin Xiufu was somewhat moved. Mr. Qin Yun and Mr. Hong Yu? Although he had lived in the West Hill for a long time, he had heard a little about Princess Ding's family background. Yi Li smiled. "Yes." Qin Xiufu was silent for a moment. His vigilant and slightly hostile expression softened a bit. He said lightly, "When I was young, I traveled to Eastern Chu to study. I was also taught by Mr. Qin Yun in my studies. I also had some friendship with Mr. Hong Yu. Of course." His gaze slowly swept over Emo Shuyao. "I also paid a visit to the regent of Eastern Chu. Who would have thought that 30 years later, the descendants of Emo Lufang and the Su family have all become talents? It is a pity that I have wasted my time. I have not even taught half a successful student." Yi Li smiled. "Mr. Xiaoting must be joking. At least half of the civil officials in the West Hill are your students. How can you say that you have wasted your time?" The Longshan Academy was one of the 3 great academies in the world. It was not an undeserved reputation. Even though the West Hill valued military power over literature, it was impossible to let a group of illiterate generals take charge of the state affairs. Indeed, half of the officials in the West Hill were from the Longshan Academy. However, Longshan Academy was built by Qin Xiufu single-handedly. Compared to Lishan Academy and Cheonghua Academy in the south of Dechu State, Longshan Academy was lacking in resources and could only be ranked at the bottom of the top 3. But with Qin Xiufu's strength alone, In a place like the West Hill where martial arts were valued more than literature, Mr. Qingyun also thought highly of him. As for the fact that the Dragon Mountain Academy did not have any outstanding disciples, it was understandable. Genom of Gojoseon had learned the lesson of Lishan Academy's influence in Dechu State. How could he let Longshan Academy repeat the same mistake? Qin Xiufu's strength alone was far from the Su family's 100 years of scholarly heritage. Even if there were outstanding disciples, they would have long been absorbed or dealt with by Genom of Gojoseon. As a result, Longshan Academy did not have a successor like Su Qingchen who could support the school. If Qin Xiufu passed away in the future, Longshan Academy would probably fall into the hands of Genom of Gojoseon or the Emperor of Xiling. Qin Xiufu's expression softened a little. He finally opened his mouth and invited the two to take a seat. After entering the parlor and taking their seats, there was naturally no one to serve tea at this time. Yili did not feel that it was beneath her status. She ordered someone to bring water and personally made tea for Qin Xiufu and Emo Xiuyao. Emo Xiuyao had not spoken since they entered the courtyard. Looking at Yili calmly pouring tea, a trace of tenderness flashed across his eyes. He glanced at Qin Xiufu warningly. Qin Xiufu drank tea and took in Emo Xiuyao's gaze. He snorted lightly and was not afraid. Mr. Qingyun, you are 80 years old, right? Are you well? After drinking tea for a while, Qin Xiufu asked. Yili pursed her lips and smiled faintly. Next year is my grandfather's 80th birthday. At that time I hope Mr. Xiaoding will come to the northwest. The teacup in Qin Xiufu's hand paused. He calmly looked at Yili. He understood the meaning behind Yili's words. It was a pity that he could not agree. He regretfully shook his head and said, "It's a pity that this old man will not have the fortune to celebrate Mr. Qingyun's birthday. However, over the years, my Longshan Academy has collected a lot of ancient books. Princess, please bring them back to Mr. Qingyun. It can be considered this old man's congratulatory gift. Mr. Qingyun, to have a granddaughter like Princess, he is very fortunate in his later years. This old man will not add flowers to brocade." Yili pursed her lips and smiled. She said, "Grandfather has never enjoyed the fortune of this younger generation. It is this younger generation that has caused him a lot of trouble. It is fortunate that grandfather is kind and does not dislike the trouble that we younger generation have caused. Mr. Xiaoding has spent his life's effort for Longshan Academy. Do you really want Longshan Academy to disappear from the world?" Qin Xiufu shook his head and said with a smile, "Fate is like this. We cannot force it." Yili said indifferently, "The so-called fate, isn't it chosen by people themselves? Although this younger generation is a woman, I also know that my fate is in my own hands and not in the hands of the heavens. There is another saying, personality determines fate and choices determine life. Mr. Qingyun is not a coward. Your choice determines the future of Longshan Academy. If you want it to exist, it will exist. If you want it to die, it can only die with you." Qin Xiufu was slightly shocked. He stared at Yili. After a long time he sighed and said, "My fate is in my own hands and not in the hands of the heavens. Personality determines fate and choices determine life. Princess Ding is so broad-minded. Prince Ding is so fortunate. Mr. Qingyun is so fortunate. Then, what is Mr. Xiaoting's decision?" Yili asked. Qin Xiufu lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, "This old man will not submit to the Prince Ding mansion. His Highness Prince Ding is a hero, but killing me and turning me into hundreds of thousands of people is too cruel." When he said this, Qin Xiufu's voice became more hoarse and sorrowful. It was clear that he was extremely angry with Emo Xiuyao's actions. Emo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and gave him a disdainful look. "I will kill you. What can you do to me?" Yili helplessly pulled Emo Xiuyao's sleeve. Emo Xiuyao curled his lips and lowered his head to continue drinking his tea. He also understood that it was absolutely useless to persuade someone like Qin Xiufu. Based on his actions in Bian City, even if he told the heavens, Qin Xiufu would not believe him. Even if he put a sword to Qin Xiufu's neck, this person might not believe him. Since that was the case, he did not need to waste the effort. If Li could persuade this person, he would stand on Li's side in the future. This was also a good thing for Li. Although Emo Xiuyao always acted spoiled and shamelessly in front of Yili, there were many things that he thought about in the long term that even young Master Qingchen might not be able to reach. After pacifying Emo Xiuyao, Yili turned to Qin Xiufu and said, This is what this junior wants to ask Mr. Xiuting for advice. Mr. Xiuting has literary talent and can speak eloquently, but you should not casually slander my husband's reputation. Qin Xiufu was first stunned that Emo Xiuyao was so easily pacified by Yi Li. Now that he heard Yi Li's words, he was even more confused. He said with some displeasure, "What does princess mean? When did this old man slander Prince Ding?" Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Just now this junior listened for half a day outside the door. Mr. Xiuting's every word was saying that my husband killed the innocent. Is that not slander?" Chapter 676. Qin Xiufu was instantly angered. He stared at Yi Li and said, "Could it be that those people that Prince Ding killed yesterday deserve to die?" Yi Li lowered his eyes and said lightly, "Two armies fight for their own benefits. I have never heard Mr. Xiuting say anything about how to deal with prisoners of war. The matter of killing the prisoners. Although Prince Ding was ruthless, there was a reason for it. Isn't Mr. Xiuting's poem too much?" Qin Xiufu stared coldly at Yi Li and said in a low voice, "Could it be that the commoners in the city are not innocent?" Yi Li blinked and said in surprise, "What commoners? When has the Maoist army killed commoners?" Qin Xiufu was also surprised. He had seen Emo Xiuyao take all of the commoners to the execution ground. Although Longshan was not high, the news of them being placed under house arrest in this courtyard was not widely spread. Naturally, he did not know that the commoners had been driven out of Bian City by Emo Xiuyao. Seeing Qin Xiufu's surprised appearance, Yi Li smiled and said, "Mr. Xiuting's information is probably wrong. General Longyang used the commoners of Dechu State as meat shields before the battle. This is not something that a general would do. Although the Northwest and Dechu State have already drawn a clear line, the Maoist army and the commoners of Dechu State are still of the same origin." My husband was angry for a moment. However, the Maoist army did not harm a single person of Bian City. I ask Mr. to investigate this matter. Hearing Yi Li's words, Qin Xiufu was a bit suspicious but also a bit happy. Longshan Academy had been in Bian City for decades. He naturally did not want to see those innocent commoners lose their lives. Carefully looking at Yi Li for a while, he finally determined that Yi Li was not lying to deceive him. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. He stood up and cupped his hands towards Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao, saying, "This old man was wrong. I apologize to Prince Ding and Princess Consort." Qin Xiufu was different from Longyang and Zhu Yan. He had never been an official in the imperial court of West Hill. He had traveled around many countries when he was young and had seen a lot. On the other hand, he did not have a particularly deep obsession with the West Hill court. The characters, customs, and even bloodlines of the Dechu State and the West Hill came from the same source. The main reason he opposed Emo Xiuyao was that Emo Xiuyao had brazenly sent troops to invade the West Hill and wanted to massacre Bian City. Now that he knew it was a misunderstanding, he naturally didn't mind apologizing to Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li. Yi Li hurriedly got up to support him, saying, "Mr. Xiuting, you don't have to do this. You're staying on the mountain for the time being, so you're naturally a little inaccessible." Qin Xiufu sat down again and asked, "Then, where are the people of Bian City now? I don't seem to have seen anyone come back." Yi Li glanced at Emo Xiuyao and said with some shame, "The people of the city have all left." Qin Xiufu didn't need to explain what she meant by leaving. He couldn't help but frown. Although their lives were saved, hundreds of thousands of people had lost their homes. Many people didn't even have enough money to take their belongings with them. Their future days wouldn't be any better. Shaking his head, Qin Xiufu looked at Emo Xiuyao and said, "I remember. The area of the 4 states in the northwest is not very large. Prince's actions, I somewhat understand, but I can't agree." Emo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and didn't answer. Qin Xiufu said, "Prince can't be thinking of driving away all the people of the West Hill and then moving the people of the northwest and even the Dechu state here. Please forgive me for speaking bluntly, Prince's actions are even more inappropriate than massacring the city." Hearing this, Emo Xiuyao finally raised his head and asked lightly, "Why?" Qin Xiufu said in a low voice, "The people of the West Hill have lived in these places for generations. If Prince only wants to occupy a piece of land, it's fine. But if Prince wants to drive the people away with so many people in the West Hill, where does Prince want to drive them to? Once they have nowhere to go, even if they are unarmed ordinary people, they will still fight back. It is true that there is enmity between the West Hill and the Dechu state, but the people of the West Hill and the people of the Dechu state may not have any deep enmity. 1,000 years ago the West Hill and the Dechu state were originally one family. If Prince wants the land of the West Hill, he should know that he has to accept the people of the West Hill. Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li looked at each other. Based on Qin Xiufu's relationship and position with them, it was already profound for him to say such words. Even had some special meaning. Yi Li nodded and said, "Teacher is right. Last night's matter was indeed handled improperly by us. Teacher, please be magnanimous and forgive us. In addition, we have come to visit in the hope that you can help us make up for it." The events of the past 2 days had a great impact on the reputation of the Mahist army. Undeserved reputation was a small matter, but if the news of the Mahist army massacring a city was deliberately exaggerated, the future expedition of the Mahist army was likely to encounter unprecedented stubborn resistance, and even cause unnecessary losses. Qin Xiufu was silent for a moment and then asked in a low voice, "What does Wang Fei want me to do?" Yi Li said softly, "Teacher Xiuting, please send out a notice to the people of the world that Bian City has returned to normal. The original people of Bian City who are willing to return can still return, and all their belongings will be returned. In addition, reopen the Longshan Academy. Teacher Xiuting, please recommend a few capable people who can help manage Bian City." Qin Xiufu calmly stared at Yi Li for a long time, but the two people opposite him knew that his heart was not as calm as it seemed on the surface. Yi Li's request seemed simple, but once he agreed, it was the same as announcing to the world that Teacher Xiuting would submit to the Prince Ding mansion. Knowing the hesitation and struggle in his heart, the two did not rush him and calmly sat and drank tea. A long time later, a trace of determination flashed across Qin Xiufu's face. He looked at Yi Li and said, "I agree to Wang Fei's request, but I also ask the Prince and Wang Fei to promise me one thing." Yi Li also sighed in relief and said with a slight smile, "Teacher Xiuting, please tell us." Qin Xiufu said, "I ask the Prince and Wang Fei to promise that they will not kill the common people of Xiling." Yi Li smiled and said, "Of course. The Mahist army is not a bloodthirsty army, and has never violated the common people, has it not?" Qin Xiufu nodded and said with a smile, "I believe Wang Fei, and hope that the Prince and Wang Fei will not break their promise." "Then please wait and see," Yi Li said with a smile. After sending off Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao, the Mahist army soldiers who had been guarding outside the courtyard also left. This also showed the sincerity of the Prince Ding mansion. In the small courtyard, Qin Xiufu looked at the cold tea on the table in front of him and sighed faintly. "Teacher, are we really going to submit to the Prince Ding mansion? This will be detrimental to Teacher's reputation. The Prince Ding mansion will not be able to stop the rumors from spreading," a young student behind Qin Xiufu asked worriedly. Qin Xiufu shook his head and looked up at the sky above the small courtyard. He said in a low voice, "Fame and infamy are all false. Seeing these two people, I suddenly feel that maybe the situation of the world is really going to change." The Dechu state and Xiling were the two great powers of the time. However, every scholar would remember that 1,000 years ago, there was a vast empire that stood on this land. That era was a time of peace and prosperity that countless people looked up to. There was a saying that, after being together for a long time, they would separate, and after being separated for a long time they would unite. The world had been divided for too long. When those two people were in front of him, he seemed to finally see an extravagant hope that he had never dared to touch in his entire life, a true dream of peace and prosperity. "But didn't Teacher say that Prince Ding's evil spirit was too strong and harmed the harmony of the world? Isn't this a long-term phenomenon?" the student asked in confusion. Qin Xiufu chuckled and said, "At that time, it was because I didn't see the other person. With her there, perhaps Prince Ding wouldn't have killed so many people. This time, weren't the people of Bian City fine? I was thinking too much. Teacher Qingyun has great foresight. How could he not see this? Since Teacher Qingyun didn't stop Prince Ding from sending troops, it meant that Teacher Qingyun also thought highly of Prince Ding. When he was young, Qin Xiufu also had great ambitions. Unfortunately, his ambitions weren't something that most people could understand. Even more people only thought of it as a kind of arrogant delusion. After hitting a wall too many times, he finally became disheartened and settled down in Dragon Mountain to teach and educate people. He hoped to pass down his ambitions and ideas. Afterwards, the Emperor of Xiling was cowardly and incompetent. Genom of Gojoseon monopolized power, and the Dechu state Immerse was suspicious and ruthless. The entire Dechu state seemed to be strong and prosperous, but in reality, it was already on the decline. All of these things made him feel even more hopeless and helpless, until he completely gave up. He even dreamed of foreign invasions in the middle of the night. The Dechu state and Xiling no longer existed. He didn't expect that when he was almost 60 years old, he would once again see a glimmer of hope. For the first time in his life, Qin Xiufu was moved and helpless. He had already passed his prime. If only he was 20 years younger. Raising his head to look at the clear and cloudless sky, Qin Xiufu murmured, "This old man has accomplished nothing in his life. Death isn't regrettable. But now I only hope to live a few more years. Perhaps in my remaining years, I can still see true peace and prosperity." Peace and prosperity? Behind him, the young student's heart shook. He didn't think that his teacher would have such high expectations for that wall of people. Although he didn't see Prince Ding and his wife with his own eyes, he hid behind and heard their conversation. As he watched the two leave, the young man also felt that there was no one in the world more compatible than them. "Teacher will definitely see that day," the young student said in a low voice. Chapter 677. With Mr. Xiuding's help, the situation in Bian City was much better than they had imagined. After all, in this chaotic world, it wasn't only Bian City that was at war. These ordinary people wouldn't easily choose to leave their homes unless they had no other choice. Although Qin Xiufu wasn't as famous as Mr. Qingyun, at least in Bian City he definitely had enough prestige. Although there was a portion of people who were gossiping about him surrendering to Ding Wangfu, but after the citizens saw the notice that he personally wrote, most of them chose to return to Bian City. These ordinary people were very easy to appease. Long Yang's actions on the city wall gave the Maoist army enough and easy-to-understand reasons to explain Emo Xiuyao's previous actions. Although they were frightened and still had some fear of the Maoist army after all, the Maoist army didn't kill any ordinary people in the end, right? Among them, perhaps the good reputation of the Maoist army played a big role. It took 2 days to settle some important matters in Bian City, including the burial of Long Yang and Zhu Yan as great generals. This action also made the people of Bian City, who were originally on guard, have a better impression of the Maoist army. After dealing with these matters, it was time for the Mo family army to continue their journey. Although they believed that with Lu Jingxian blocking, Genom of Gojoseon wouldn't be able to come back to help so quickly, it was better to end this battle quickly. Emo Shuyao left a small number of troops and temporarily led the people in Bian City. On the morning of the 3rd day he took people and set off again. In a few days the Northwest would naturally send people to take over Bian City. They couldn't leave a large number of troops along the way, especially when the Maoist army didn't have many troops. Just after leaving Bian City, Emo Shuyao received a battle report from Dechu State. In the north, Leng Huai was bitterly resisting the Northern Region Army at Xijing Pass. The Northern Tribes Army in the north of Dechu State had finally broken through the borders of Dechu State. Countless nomadic cavalrymen of the grassland rushed into the pass, burning, killing and looting along the way. At the same time, a large number of Dechu State citizens flooded into the northwest, and the Feihong Pass was also frequented by the northern tribes. Although they had no intention of provoking the Maoist army, Su Qingshan had to be careful. At this time the Dechu State's court was still not united. The struggle for power was even more intense than before. As the regent, Mo Jingli did not throw all of his energy into the battle. Instead he secretly made preparations. Once the enemy neared the Chujing, he would immediately abandon the Chujing and retreat to Jiangnan. After reading the letter he had just received, Mo Xiuyao threw the letter on the table with a dark expression. He said coldly, "Mo Jingli, that idiot." Sitting beside him, Yili picked up the letter and looked at it. She smiled faintly and said, "The northern region, northern tribes, and Xiling are all brave and skilled in battle. The armies of the 3 countries have all arrived. No wonder Mo Jingli retreated before he was defeated. Leng Haoyu and the others probably won't be able to hold on." Mo Shuyao pulled Yili to sit beside him. He lowered his head and rubbed her black hair. Leng Huai has finally lived up to his reputation for being able to hold on until now. If the northern tribes and Xiling didn't stir things up, and if the Dechu State's court supported him, the outcome would be uncertain. It's a pity. His luck is not on his side. It's not his fault. Lei Jinting really doesn't plan on withdrawing his troops from the Dechu state. Yili looked at the letter in her hand and asked with a frown. Mo Shuyao snorted softly and said, Lu Songxian's 400,000 troops are blocking the front, and the Dechu state's hundreds of thousands of troops are watching from behind. In the south, Nanzhao is eyeing covetously. That's right. There's also Murongshan leading 200,000 troops north. Lei Jinting can't retreat even if he wants to. If he turns back and is blocked by Lu Jingxian, and Murongshan catches up with him from behind and joins forces with the Dechu state's troops to surround him from three sides. The war god of Xiling. It's not impossible for his army to be wiped out again. Most importantly, even if he breaks through Lu Songxian's defense line and catches up, how many troops does he have? There's also the attack of Nanzhao and the small countries in the western region. At that time he will have nothing. Yili furrowed her brows and thought for a moment. She asked, Then what do you think he will do? Mo Shuyao rubbed between his brows and thought for a moment. He said, if he can't retreat, then he can only advance. If he can take Jiangnan before Murongshan and Mo Jingli, then it will be a bit troublesome. Yili had to admit that if Lei Jinting took Jiangnan, it would be a bit troublesome. Jiangnan was a rich and populous place that the West Hill could not compare to. Once Lei Jinting took it, it would only take a few years for Lei Jinting to become the overlord of Jiangnan. From then on he would be free from the status and restrictions of West Hill's Genom of Gojoseon, and he would have even more power than he had now. If that was the case, it was hard to say whether they had won or lost this battle. Forget it. Even if we lose, the ones who lose are Mo Jingli and the Dechu state. We must take the West Hill. Mo Shuyao said in a low voice. The Northwest had no other choice. Considering their reputation, they could not attack the Dechu state. Thus the only choice left was the West Hill. They couldn't let the Mahist army go out of the pass to fight for territory with the northern tribes and become nomads, could they? Yili furrowed her brows and thought for a while. Then she smiled and said, Maybe we are worrying too much. The Dechu state still has millions of soldiers. Mo Jingli is not so stupid as to let Lei Jinting take over his territory so easily. Besides, if it really doesn't work out, why don't we ask General Lu to help them again? Maybe we can still go back in time. They did not plan to take over the entire West Hill. No matter how weak the West Hill was, it was still a vast country. If they wanted to take over the entire territory, it would be impossible without 2 or 3 years. As long as they could take over the West Hill Imperial City in the shortest time possible, things would be much easier in the future. Mo Shuyao smiled and lowered his head to kiss Yili's forehead. He said with a smile, Yili is right. Let me think. Leng Huai's side is already powerless. Let him go back to the northwest. Of course he would also bring back a famous general for them. Although Leng Huai was old, his ability to lead troops was definitely not below Zhang Qilon and Lu Jingxian. The Mahist army had not fought for too many years. There were basically no old generals in the army. The younger generation was also unable to hold their own. Thus, Mo Shuyao had to personally lead troops into battle. As for how to make Leng Huai willingly work for the Mahist army, that would depend on his ability. Ignoring all this, Mo Shuyao casually placed the battle report aside and hugged Yili to study the map in front of him. Ever since he had Yili's Qilin training, Mo Shuyao had to admit that at least in terms of terrain exploration, it had improved a lot. In the past, even the most experienced scouts in the Mahist army could not explore and draw such a perfect map. They could even create a perfect battlefield sand table. Right now, Lei Tingfeng has brought 30,000 wounded soldiers to defend Feng City. Adding the original defenders of Feng City, the total number is no less than 150,000. It doesn't seem difficult. Let's leave this battle to Qin Yun. Mo Shuyao pointed to the location on the map and said. Chapter 678. Yili nodded in agreement. She thought for a moment and said, However, Feng City is different from Bian City. It is located at the intersection of Xiling's north, south, east and west. We have to be careful of reinforcements. If we are surrounded, Qin Yun may not be able to handle it. Mo Shuyao thought for a moment and tilted his head. There shouldn't be many reinforcements. Nanzhao has already sent out its troops. After news of Long Yang's death spread, the kingdoms of the western regions are also restless. Even if they want to send reinforcements, they may not be able to. Besides, I don't think that the Emperor of Xiling really wants Lei Tingfeng to live. The Emperor of Xiling? Yili had a flash of inspiration. Lei Jinting is leading troops outside and now Lei Tingfeng is trapped in Feng City. This is indeed an opportunity for the Emperor of Xiling. Although the Emperor of Xiling was weak and incompetent, for such a weak and incompetent emperor to have not been succeeded by Lei Jinting for more than 20 years, he should have some ability. Although the current situation was very disadvantageous for Xiling, if the Emperor of Xiling wanted to get rid of Jinan Palace, this was the best opportunity. You sent people to find the Emperor of Xiling? Yili looked up and asked softly. Emo Shuyao smiled faintly. Fourth young master Su. Among the 5 sons of the Su family, other than the genius Su Qingchen, the most skilled and most suited to be a lobbyist was the 4th young master of the Su family, Su Qingbai. Most importantly, most people including Lei Jinting, still thought that the 4th young master of the Su family was still farming in the northwest. Who would have thought that Su Qingbai had secretly run to the Emperor of Xiling's city to cut off Lei Tingfeng's escape route? Isn't that too dangerous? Yili frowned and asked worriedly. Everything they said was based on the assumption that the Emperor of Xiling was willing to destroy Jinan Palace at all costs. If the Emperor of Xiling was still rational or unwilling to do so, then Su Qingbai would be in danger. Emo Shuyao played with Yi Li's hand and said softly, "Don't worry. I've hired people to protect him in secret. There won't be any problems." Yi Li was a little surprised by his confidence. "Who is it?" "Ling Taihan and a team of Qilin." Emo Shuyao laughed. Besides, even if the Emperor of Xiling really did detain Su Qingbai, he wouldn't dare to kill him in this situation. At most he'll use him to negotiate with us. I'll try to save him. Li, I've said before that I'll protect anyone you care about. I won't let him take any risks. Hearing this, Yi Li's heart softened. She gently leaned into Emo Xiuyao's arms. For Ling Taihan to protect Su Qingbai, Emo Xiuyao had to pay a price. Just from this point alone, it was clear that he had put in a lot of effort. Besides, Su Qingbai was also a grown man. He had his own ambitions and aspirations. Yi Li couldn't stop him from doing everything for his safety. If he didn't want to go, Emo Xiuyao couldn't force him. However, she was a little unhappy that she didn't know about this at all. Prince is really far-sighted. He's already made so many arrangements without anyone noticing. Yi Li lightly leaned against Emo Xiuyao's chest. After being married for so many years, Emo Xiuyao could tell that she was unhappy just by hearing her voice. He hugged Yi Li and laughed softly. "Doesn't Li dislike these things? As long as Li doesn't like it, why don't you leave it to me? Besides, this was decided before the battle. If Li knew about it at that time, wouldn't Li be put in a difficult position in front of Lady Su? Prince is really considerate. Should I thank you?" Yi Li raised her head and looked at him with a smile. Emo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and smiled. "Of course I am the most considerate husband. Has Li seen anyone better than I?" Yi Li rolled her eyes at him in exasperation. "Good person? Is there anyone in the world more black-hearted than you, Prince? I have to be careful. Maybe one day I'll be tricked by you." Emo Xiuyao laughed loudly. "Wife can see that husband is so black-hearted. This means that you aren't so innocent. Aren't we a match made in heaven? Husband definitely won't trick Li Li." Standing outside the door, Feng Jiao had a conflicted expression. He couldn't decide whether to go in and disturb them. Perhaps Wang Yi was confessing his feelings to Wang Fei. What match made in heaven? Prince, you really have thick skin. Fengsen, what is it? Why aren't you going in? Zhang Qilan, who had followed behind them, looked at Feng San, who was standing at the door with a frown. Feng Jiao gave a soft cough and glanced exasperatedly at Zhang Qilan. He said loudly, "Prince, this subordinate has something to see you about." After being inexplicably glared at, Zhang Qilan felt even more inexplicable and touched his nose. Did he say something wrong? "Come in." From inside the tent, Emo Xiuyao's voice said faintly. Entering the tent, he saw that both the prince and Wang Fei were calmly looking at him. Feng Jiao instantly felt that the awkwardness in his heart had become awkward. He really couldn't stay calm. Feng Jiao scolded himself in his heart. Yi Li looked at him with a smile and asked, "Feng San, General Zhang, what is it?" Zhang Qilan looked strangely at Feng Jiao and reported in a clear voice, "Wang Fei, we are less than 10 li from Feng City. This subordinate requests to lead the troops at the front." Yi Li said with a smile, "General has come at the right time. Just now Prince and I had discussed it. Qin Yun should lead the vanguard." They are young and don't have much experience. Such a small matter isn't worth General's personal attention. Zhang Qilon was a straightforward person and didn't have any thoughts of stealing credit. Hearing Yi Li's words, he felt it was reasonable and nodded, saying, "If that's the case, this subordinate will follow your orders." Mo Shuyao said, "The terrain around Feng City is complicated. Qin Yun and the others are still young. You still have to watch from the back to prevent them from falling into an ambush." Zhang Qilon nodded and said seriously, "Prince, don't worry. This subordinate understands." Mo Shuyao nodded and looked at Feng Zhiao on the side. Zhang Qilon had come to ask to fight. What had Feng Zhiao come to do? Feng Zhiao had also come to ask to fight. But he had been a beat slower after hearing Mo Shuyao's words, and Zhang Qilon had taken the lead. Now that Mo Shuyao had rejected Zhang Qilon's request, he had nothing to say. To prevent Mo Shuyao from settling the score, he hurriedly left with Zhang Qilon. On the border between Dechu State and Xiling, the two armies were in a stalemate. For hundreds of years, there had been many confrontations between the two armies on the border of the two countries. But this time it was different from the past. The Mahist army that was supposed to protect Dechu State stood on the border of Xiling. And the Xiling army, who had been eyeing Dechu State covetously, stood on Dechu State's land, determined to break through the Mahist army's defense and return to Xiling. But whether it was the Mahist army or Lu Jingxian, they were not to be trifled with. Even though Genom of Gojoseon of Xiling was famous all over the world, breaking through the blockade of 400,000 troops was not something that could be done overnight. Moreover, Lu Jingxian had made it clear that he did not want to destroy the enemy, but only wanted to defend. It was almost moonlight, but the Xiling army still could not push back the Mahist army's defense line by even 1 mile. And Murongxin's 200,000 troops had already come north from the south, and were approaching day by day. Chapter 679. Prince, a report from West Hill. In the tent, a soldier hurried in, presented a letter with both hands and then left. Genom of Gojoseon opened the letter and read it. His face, which had not been clear for more than half a month, was gloomy. The soldiers gathered in the tent quickly asked, "Prince, what happened in West Hill?" Genom of Gojoseon frowned and said lightly, "Zhu Yan and Long Yang died in battle, and Tingfeng is trapped in Feng City." Everyone was in an uproar. Zhu Yan and Long Yang were not ordinary people. Before Lei Jinting, they were the most famous generals in West Hill. They also belonged to the era of Long Yang and Zhu Yan, and represented the most powerful period of the Xiling army. Even Lei Jinting, who was known as the war god of West Hill, had to admit that after losing Zhu Yan and others, the strength of the Xiling army had declined. After all, no matter how powerful Lei Jinting was, he was only one person. He had to command the Xiling army and take care of political affairs. And people often could not take care of everything. But now, in less than a month, West Hill had already lost 4 or 5 cities, and even lost 2 famous generals. How powerful was the Mahist army or Mo Shuyao exactly? How is this possible? Mo Shuyao took Bian City in less than 10 days? Someone exclaimed. Lei Jinting said in a low voice, "To be precise, it was 6 days. In 6 days not only did he take Bian City, but he also annihilated the hundreds of thousands of troops that Zhu Yan hid near Bian City." Although Lei Jinting was also shocked and angry that Zhu Yan hid hundreds of thousands of troops, now Zhu Yan's men were dead and the Jingwa army was wiped out. There was no point in talking about it. Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. "Prince, what should we do now?" "Prince." Everything else was easy to deal with, but Lei Tingfeng was trapped in Feng City, which was a big problem. Save him? Who should he send to save him? Genom of Gojoseon only had one son, Lei Tingfeng. How could he not save him? Lei Jinting sucked in a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Immediately dispatch the gold-clothed guards. No matter what, bring Tingfeng out of Feng City." "Prince, Feng City?" the general asked cautiously. Lei Jinting lowered his eyes and clenched his fists under the table. He said in a deep voice, "We can't care about that now. Tomorrow morning we will turn around and lead our troops south." "Prince." Then the West Hill. After all, they were all generals of the West Hill. It was impossible for them to remain indifferent when they knew that the West Hill might be occupied by the Mahist army. They looked at Lei Jinting with a troubled expression. Lei Jinting frowned and said in a deep voice, "We have been tricked by Mo Shuyao." Emo Shuyao cannot attack the Dechu state. That is why he led us to attack the Dechu state while he took the opportunity to attack the West Hill. We can't go back now. Once we are entangled with Lu Jingxian's army for too long, Murongxin and the Dechu state troops behind him will pounce on us and surround us from 3 sides. When that happens, it is unknown how many of us will be able to return to the West Hill. Everyone's expression turned ugly. Prince, what should we do? Lei Jinting said indifferently, since we can't go back then, we have to go forward. We have to go all the way south and conquer the south of the Dechu state. Now that Murongxin is going north, we can go south and avoid him. At that time, the worst-case scenario would be us defending the Yunlan River and ruling with the Dechu state. In the short term, the Dechu state does not have the ability to go south and fight with us. The northern region and the northern tribes in the north are enough to keep them busy. In addition, Emo Shuyao will not be able to take over all the land in the West Hill in the short term. At most, he will withdraw his troops when we reach the capital. At that time, we will still be able to coordinate with the West Hill. Tinfeng can control the situation in the West Hill. Everyone was silent. No one asked what would happen if the Crown Prince could not control the situation. At least Lei Jinting had given them a seemingly good way out. Occupying the Jiangnan of the Dechu state, that rich and populous land was something they had dreamed of obtaining. It was also the reason why they had been in constant conflict with the Dechu state for the past 100 years. They were clearly of the same origin. Why should the Dechu state have such a prosperous and populous land, while they could only suffer the cold wind and dust in the northwest? Everyone exchanged glances and whispered for a moment. Finally they said in unison, "We obey the prince's orders." Lei Jinting nodded in satisfaction. Although he had accidentally fallen into Emo Shuyao's trap this time, he knew in his heart that even if he had to do it again he would still choose to do the same. With Emo Shuyao and the Mahist army in the northwest, they could only take risks if they wanted to change the previous situation. And the land in the West Hill was too barren compared to the Dechu state. Now, Deputy General, I will give you 300,000 soldiers and horses. Go north and join forces with the northern tribes to attack the Feihong Pass. The rest of you will follow I to the south. After organizing his thoughts, Lei Jinting quickly issued the order. The Deputy General was stunned and said with some confusion, "Prince, if we provoke the Prince Ding mansion now, isn't it a little?" Lei Jinting snorted softly and said, "Don't worry. We don't really need to break through Feihong Pass. We just need to make it look like we are attacking by force. After I lead the troops to the south, don't let Lu Jingxian have the time to come and cause trouble for I." The Deputy General then understood Lei Jinting's thoughts. He couldn't help but ask, "If we attack Feihong Pass, will Lu Jingxian come back to help? If so, we can break through the blockade of the Mahist army and go back to the West Hill to help?" Lei Jinting shook his head and said, "Lu Jingxian is not that stupid. If we go back to the West Hill, he will only stop us at all costs. But if we go south..." In his opinion, the northwest is much more important than Jiangnan, which belongs to Mo Jingli. The Deputy General surrendered. "Prince is wise. I did not think it through. I accept the order." Lei Jinting nodded and said, "Go. Remember not to act rashly. I have already sent people to contact the general of the northern tribes. There should be news soon. After the northern tribes and the northwest Mahist army start fighting, you can act according to the situation." "I accept the order." After dismissing the generals, Lei Jinting looked at the northwest in a daze. After a long time he sneered and said, "Emo Shuyao, this time you have won half a round. But after I take Jiangnan..." Chapter 680. Mo Jingli was the first to know about Genom of Gojoseon's movements. No matter how stupid Mo Jingli was, he still remembered that Jiangnan was the capital that allowed him to settle down. Moreover, Mo Jingli was never a true idiot. He was just not smart enough compared to some people. Therefore, the moment he received news of Genom of Gojoseon's movements, Mo Jingli ordered Murongxin, who was leading troops north, to stop Genom of Gojoseon from going south. Murongxin had led troops north because the troops in the north had been badly beaten up by Genom of Gojoseon. He had originally come to settle accounts with Lei Jinting. Naturally, he did not care where he would settle accounts with him. After receiving Mo Jingli's order, he immediately led the army that was originally heading north to the southeast. He wanted to block the front of the Xiling army. Even after making these plans, Mo Jingli still could not be at ease. He secretly ordered his confidants to secretly prepare to move the capital to the south. He completely did not think about the lives of the soldiers who were still fighting the north and the northern tribes. However, Mo Jingli's actions were not truly hidden from everyone. Very quickly, a secret letter was sent to Zijing Pass in the northeast of the Chu capital. At Zijing Pass, the battles that were getting more and more difficult by the day caused Leng Huai to grow much older and thinner in the past month. The army in the north seemed to know that the Dechu state was an arrow at the end of its flight. Ever since the northern tribes entered the pass, they began to attack even more crazily. Leng Huai had reason to believe that the northern tribes had secretly colluded long ago. However, the rations that the Chu capital sent to Zijing Pass were decreasing by the day. Ever since the new emperor ascended the throne, the rations for this month had been delayed for 10 days and still had not arrived. If there was still no rations after 10 days, the Dechu state would lose without a fight even if the northern tribes did not attack. "Father, what's the matter?" Leng Haoyu, who was suddenly called into the study, looked at his old father with a leisurely and unruly expression, as if he couldn't understand where his father's worries came from. Leng Huai was infuriated by his calm demeanor. He didn't know when it started, but this son of his had always acted like he didn't care about anything even if the sky fell down. Although Leng Huai already knew that Leng Haoyu wasn't really that kind of playboy, he still couldn't help but want to get angry when he saw him like this. "What's with the grin on your face?" Leng Huai said in a deep voice. Leng Haoyu pursed his lips. Could it be that he wanted to be like eldest Leng, who had a sullen face all day long as if someone owed him millions of taels of silver? Rolling his eyes, Leng Haoyu said, "Father, what's the matter?" "I'm going to accompany Ting to play." Leng Huai's veins on his forehead throbbed. "Play? What time is it now? You still have time to play with your wife? What's wrong with your wife? You're not sensible and she's not sensible either? She's always fooling around." Leng Haoyu didn't care if he was criticized, but it was not okay if his wife was criticized. Leng Haoyu said unhappily, "What's wrong with my wife? She can take care of the family, have children, do business with me and accompany me to the battlefield. Even if she's not as good as Princess Ding, she's not bad. Can your wife do it? Can your eldest daughter-in-law do it?" As he spoke, Leng Haoyu gradually became complacent, as if he felt that his wife was really very good. Leng Huai couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth when he saw him like this. He said helplessly, "I didn't call you here to hear you brag about your wife. Am I bragging? I'm telling the truth, okay?" Leng Haoyu muttered in a low voice in dissatisfaction. He thought to himself, wasn't it you who started it? Why didn't you say it earlier? "What's the matter? Father, just say it." Leng Huai frowned and said in a deep voice, "What happened in the capital? Don't say you don't know. I know you have another source of information." Leng Haoyu couldn't help but smile at him. He raised his head and asked, "Then father, do you know where my source of information came from? Do you really want to use it? If you use it, what will you use to return it?" This. Leng Huai was speechless, although Leng Haoyu never said anything. However, Leng Haoyu didn't deliberately hide anything from him in the past few months. He more or less guessed what his son had been doing all these years. Although he was shocked and angry at his son's boldness and recklessness, on the other hand, as a father, he also felt proud and relieved that his son could have such ability and achievements without the help of his family. Leng Haoyu wasn't in a hurry. He smiled and waited for his father to make a decision. After a long while, Leng Huai glared at him angrily and said, "You're my son. As a father, do I have to pay for asking you for information?" Leng Haoyu raised his eyebrows and looked at him with some ridicule. He didn't make things difficult and shrugged, "Actually, it's nothing." Genom of Gojoseon's road back to Xiling was cut off by Prince Ding. He planned to abandon his hometown and go to Jiangnan to snatch Prince Li's territory. Of course, Prince Li wasn't willing to give up his territory so easily, so he was secretly preparing to return to Jiangnan. If he wants to return to Jiangnan, he naturally has to bring many things and even military forces back. How would he have the time to care about your small Zijing Pass? Anyway, Prince Li isn't the emperor. Even if the capital is gone, there's still the prosperous land of Jiangnan. It's not a loss to him. What? Leng Haoyu said it casually, but Leng Huai's face turned pale when he heard it. How is that possible? Doesn't Prince Li know that once the capital is lost, more than half of the Dechu state will be finished? Leng Haoyu raised his eyebrows and said, "Why are you asking me if you don't believe me?" So what if Prince Li doesn't give up? The northern tribes have already entered the pass. It won't be long before they attack the Chu capital. When that time comes, can your Zijing Pass still hold on? If you retreat then, I'm afraid that Mo Jingli won't even be able to keep Jiangnan. Of course he has to leave first. When he goes to Jiangnan he doesn't need to be a regent. When the young emperor is killed by the northern tribes or the northern region, he can directly ascend to the throne and become the emperor. Leng Huai was speechless. Although Leng Haoyu's words were crude and unadorned, they undoubtedly hit the nail on the head. But how could he be willing to give up the Zijing Pass that he had defended for so long, especially when he knew the consequences of giving up? Then why did you come? Prince Ding naturally has his own plans for you to come, right? Does Prince Ding really want to watch the Dechu state fall? Since things had reached this point, Leng Huai didn't avoid Leng Haoyu's identity anymore. Leng Haoyu's expression immediately turned ugly. He sneered, "Why did I come? Who asked you to run to the battlefield at such an old age so recklessly? Generally speaking, I wanted to see if I should collect your corpse or Leng Qingyu's. As for Prince Ding, you can give up. Prince Ding is in Xiling right now. Even if he changes his mind, he can't grow wings and fly back." No matter what Mo Shuyao was thinking, Leng Haoyu appeared here because he was worried that his father would accidentally kill him on the battlefield. He didn't expect the other party to not appreciate it at all. It was no wonder that Leng Haoyu's expression turned ugly. Leng Huai also knew that he had been too anxious and said too much, so he didn't care that Leng Haoyu's words were unpleasant. Looking at his son's ugly expression, he couldn't help but sigh. Forget it. In a few days bring Ting back to the capital. Leng Haoyu raised his eyebrows. What do you mean? Chapter 681. Leng Huai said in annoyance, "You also said that we can't hold on to Zijing Pass anymore. Your elder brother and I are generals of the Dechu state. Dying on the battlefield is something we ought to do. Don't tell me you want to join in the fun? Hurry up and leave while the situation is still better. The Leng family. If you have the ability, take care of the Leng family." Even if he was loyal to the Dechu state and the imperial family, he didn't really plan on sacrificing all of his sons. Leng Huai wasn't a subject of the Dechu state to begin with. Leng Huai naturally had him leave without any pressure. Leng Haoyu didn't appreciate this kindness. He rolled his eyes and said, "Take care of your wife, son and grandson yourself. I begged the prince not to come to Zijing Pass to collect your corpse." Leng Haoyu silently complained in his heart. Leng Huai only thought that he had a knot in his heart about the Leng family. He shook his head helplessly and said, "Fine, everyone has their own fate. It's up to you." Leng Haoyu frowned and looked at Leng Huai. "Have you never thought of retreating? Do you really plan on letting these hundreds of thousands of soldiers die with you in Zijing Pass?" Leng Huai smiled bitterly. "Retreat? Retreat to where? Behind us is the Chu capital. We can retreat, but where can these ordinary people retreat to? This old man hasn't fought any earth-shattering battles in my life, but I've never been a coward who abandoned a city and fled." Leng Haoyu could only roll his eyes and wave his hand. "Fine, I don't care about you. You don't care about me either. When it's time to leave, I'll naturally leave." If it really came down to it, he would knock this old man unconscious and bring him to the northwest. Although he didn't like this old man, he didn't plan on sending his father to his death so early. What's more, His Highness wanted a general who could fight. He was just over 50 years old. He wasn't that old. He could still lead soldiers for a few more years. Leng Huai felt very uncomfortable under his son's strange gaze, but he couldn't guess what he was thinking. She could only wave her hand to dismiss him. On the other hand, Leng Huai was still holding the fort at Redbud Pass, temporarily blocking the advance of the northern army. On the other hand, it was not so easy. Most of the northern tribe's soldiers were cavalry. Furthermore, the weather outside the Great Pass was already bad. The northern tribe's soldiers were much more ferocious than the Dechu state soldiers. Even their war horses were the best in the world. In terms of cavalry, only the Mahist army's Black Cloud cavalry could compare to the northern tribes. However, the Black Cloud cavalry was much smaller than the northern tribes. Moreover, the Black Cloud cavalry was good at long-distance raids, leaving after one attack. Even if they were to face the northern tribes, they might not be able to defeat them. Thus, it was not hard to imagine what would happen after the hundreds of thousands of northern tribes' cavalrymen entered the pass. The northern tribes were slightly different from the northern tribes. Although the northern tribes were mostly barbarians, Enchanting or Lin Yuan was from the Central Plains. He had also recruited many capable people from the Central Plains. He also knew that what he wanted to do was to rule the Central Plains, not destroy it. Thus, even though the northern tribes' army could not be said to be invincible, there would not be any large-scale massacres. However, the northern tribes were different. The northern tribes were completely nomadic people. They killed their way into the Central Plains in order to take over the fertile land and rich resources for themselves. Thus, when faced with the people of Dechu State who originally had these resources, they would naturally kill them mercilessly. Wherever the northern tribes' army went, there would be cries of misery and blood flowing like rivers. Most of the people along the way would die. The atmosphere in the regent's residence in the Chu capital was heavy. Duke Hua glared at the calm Mo Jingli in front of him with wide eyes. Duke Hua's idea of guarding the border was not realized in the end. It was not that Mo Jingli did not believe in Duke Hua's ability, but he was also wary of Duke Hua like Mo Jingqi. Although no one said it on the surface, Mo Jingli knew where the missing empress had gone. He naturally had reason to believe that Duke Hua's residents had already found a place for him to retreat. He was worried that Duke Hua would lead the Dechu State army to the northwest. Prince, the northern tribes' army has already entered the pass. The northern tribes' army is also pressing in. Why is Prince still unwilling to give the provisions to General Leng? Duke Hua asked sternly. Mo Jingli's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. He said calmly, "Old Duke, you are very well informed." Duke Hua snorted and said calmly, "I have been on the battlefield for half my life. I still have 2 old friends in the army." Although the Hua family and Leng Huai family did not get along well, Leng Huai had spent some time under Duke Hua's command when he first entered the battlefield. Therefore it was not strange for Duke Hua to ask now. Mo Jingli of course did not believe Duke Hua's words, but he did not show it. He only said calmly, "Old Duke, you should know that since the Mahist army broke off relations with the Dechu state, the north will not be able to withstand it sooner or later." Speaking of this, Mo Jingli was not depressed. Even if he was not the emperor, he was the actual ruler of the Dechu state. No one in power would be willing to see their territory being invaded. However, this was the reality and he had to admit it. Duke Hua sneered and said, "Without provisions and without reinforcements, they will not be able to hold on. I know that King Li's base is in the south. When he heard that the West Hill Regent is sending troops south, he is naturally anxious." Duke Hua. Mo Jingli's face flashed with anger. He said in a low voice, "Duke Hua, please be careful with your words." Duke Hua did not back down at all. "Am I wrong?" The prince embezzled Leng Huai's provisions and did not give any reinforcements to the north. Is it not because he wants to go south? Mo Jingli's eyes flashed with embarrassment. He said angrily, "The south is more important than the north. If Jiangnan is also occupied by Enchanting, the north will not be able to withstand it. What should we do if we are sandwiched in the middle and attacked from both sides?" All of this is caused by Mo Shuyao. If he did not run to attack the West Hill and block Enchanting's escape route, why would Enchanting turn his attention to Jiangnan? Hearing this, Duke Hua looked calmly at Mo Jingli as if he was looking at an ignorant child. Mo Jingli also understood that he was being unreasonable. The Prince Ding mansion had clearly broken off relations with the Dechu state. Whether it was Mo Shuyao attacking the West Hill or cutting off Enchanting's escape route, it was all for his own benefit. It was none of Mo Xuyao's business whose interests would be harmed in this. As a person in power, he would not value the benefits of others more than his own. In addition, if the Dechu state did not disappoint, they could work together with the Prince Ding mansion to trap Enchanting. It was their own incompetence that allowed Enchanting to lead his troops south and sweep everything before him. However, Mo Jingli could not help but want to vent his anger. If it were not for Mo Shuyao, there would not be so many problems. After gathering his thoughts, Mo Jingli did not want to continue discussing who was right and who was wrong with Duke Hua. Most of the old people in court were biased towards the Prince Ding mansion. Even now that the Prince Ding mansion had abandoned the Dechu state and brought great disaster to the Dechu state, these people would still speak up for Mo Shuyao. This situation made Mo Jingli jealous, hateful and helpless. "Husband Hua, you didn't come to I's residence just to discuss this matter with I, right?" Mo Jingli put on an indifferent expression and asked. Chapter 682. Du Hua glanced at him. Things had already come to this point. He was not here to discuss the issue of military supplies. Was he here to drink tea with him? Mo Jingli said, actually, old Duke does not need to worry about these matters. Naturally, the officials in the court will take care of it. Does old Duke think that all the officials in the court are useless? Du Hua sneered. Mo Jingli had not learned any skills in these few years, but he had learned to speak in a bureaucratic manner. The officials in the court were indeed not useless, but none of them had solved the problem at the border. Like King Li, there were quite a few people who were secretly packing up their belongings and preparing to head south. Du Hua looked at Mo Jingli and said in a low voice, since the northern tribes entered the pass, they have killed many people. The areas that were invaded by the northern tribes have been filled with crimson corpses. I wonder if Prince has heard of this? Mo Jingli was taken aback and nodded, I have heard of it. However, the rumors are not true. Old Duke, you are thinking too much. Du Hua was so angry that he laughed. Rumors? Not true. I do not believe that King Li does not know whether it is a rumor or not. After the Chu capital, the road to the south is flat. Do I know where King Li plans to retreat to? To the south of the Yunlong River? The northern tribes are not good at water battles. This is a good idea. However, I would like to ask, where does King Li place the millions of people in the north of Dechu state? Seeing that Mo Jingli was silent, Du Hua's old face was filled with sorrow. He looked at Mo Jingli with pain and said, King Li, those people who were killed are the people of Dechu state. They are your Mo family's people. Mo Jingli's face was gloomy. He stared at Du Hua and said, Du Hua, are you criticizing I? Du Hua smiled bitterly and said, how can this old man dare to criticize the regent? I only remember that the regent Mo Lufeng said one thing. The one who wins the people's hearts wins the world. His Highness Prince Li treats his own people as objects that can be casually thrown away, so how can you expect them to be loyal to you? When the Prince Regent first took over, the situation in Dechu state wasn't much better than it is now. Enough. Mo Jingli rudely interrupted Du Hua's words. Du Hua's earnest advice sounded more like sarcasm in his ears. Coldly looking at the old man in front of him, Mo Jingli sneered, I don't have the ability of Mo Xiuyao and Mo Lufeng, but so what? Do you want I to invite Mo Xiuyao back for you, or do you want I to ask His Majesty to abdicate the throne to Mo Xiuyao? Du Hua was so angry that his entire body trembled. If the previous emperor could be considered a scheming and ambitious person, then Mo Jingli and the Mo brothers were the oddities of the Mo family. They were already in such a situation, yet they still refused to reflect on themselves and instead pushed the blame onto others. With such a descendant, Dechu state was truly finished, wasn't it? Du Hua took a few deep breaths, calming the anger in his heart. Finally, he stood up and said, Fine, Prince Li won't listen to this old man's words, so this old man won't bother you anymore. I ask Prince Li to quickly transfer rations and reinforcements to support the northern tribes' front lines. Du Hua swallowed his anger, but Mo Jingli's anger had not completely dissipated. He coldly looked at Du Hua and said, Du Hua, I remember that you've already retired from your position for a long time. Whether or not you transfer rations, whether or not you give reinforcements, and when you give them is up to I, Du Hua, you should return to your residence and rest. Perhaps in a few days we'll have to leave for the south. If something happens to Du Hua along the way, I won't be able to explain it to the Hua family. This old man will not leave the capital, Du Hua said firmly. Mo Jingli did not care. Whether Du Hua wanted to leave the capital or not was not up to him to decide. Although Du Hua had not led troops for many years, he still had many old friends in the army. Mo Jingli would definitely not let him stay in the capital. Rather than letting Mo Xiuyao take advantage of him, he would rather give the capital to the northern tribes and the northern tribes. As for Du Hua's wishes, they were completely out of Mo Jingli's consideration. If Du Hua really did not want to cooperate, he did not mind using force. Prince Li. How could Du Hua not see through Mo Jingli's plan? Not only his plan, but Du Hua could also guess what he was thinking. It was because of this that he felt even more upset. With Mo Jingli's temperament, let alone in this chaotic world, even in a peaceful time, he was not suitable to be a ruler. Du Hua composed himself and said in a low voice, This old man will definitely not leave the capital. If Prince Ding insists, why don't you try to bring this old man's corpse out of the capital? Mo Jingli frowned in displeasure. Although he did not like Duquois very much, Duquois was still one of the 4 officials in the capital. However, since Duquois was the only old official in the capital who had experienced 4 dynasties, he did not dare to force Duquois to his death. Moreover, persuading those old fellows to agree to move the capital was also a big matter. If Duquois openly opposed it, many of the old officials would not agree. He frowned and said, "Duquois, I am doing this for your own good. You're already so old, why don't you go to Jiangnan and enjoy your old age? As for the capital, one day we will return." Duquois laughed coldly. "Enjoy my old age? When I dream of those innocent people crying, this old man can't sleep. I can't sleep. This old man has lived long enough. I vow to live and die with the capital." Mo Jingli stood up angrily. He stared at Duquois for a while before coldly saying, "I will not give you a single soldier." Then he flicked his sleeves and left. Duquois was left sitting in the parlor in a daze. Finally he looked up to the sky and sighed, "Idiot. De Chu State has such an idiot." A line of old tears rolled down his wrinkled face. Looking at the regent's residence that was resplendent and richly decorated, he could only slowly stand up and walk out. De Chu State is finished. Chapter 683. Half a month later, the regent of De Chu State, Mo Jingli, brought the Empress Dowager, the new emperor, and most of the court officials south to Jiangnan. Those who remained in the capital were the old court officials led by Duquois and a portion of the civil officials. When the soldiers on the front lines received this news, their morale instantly collapsed. The battle that was not optimistic to begin with was a complete failure. The northern tribes' army continued to push south. 10 days later, the Zijing Pass that had held out for months was finally broken. Large amounts of northern soldiers poured into the pass. At this time, when Mo Xiuyao, who was far away in Xiling, received the news, the Mahist army had already reached the emperor of Xiling's city. In the previous battle of Feng City, with the lessons learned and sharpened in Bian City, the performance of Qin Yun and the other young generals was rather outstanding. Although Lei Tingfeng was rescued by the gold-robed guards in the end, the flaws could not obscure the beauty of the jade. The Mo family army continued to push forward, and after several months of continuous battles, this group of soldiers that originally did not have much experience had become the true elite soldiers of the Mo family army. When the Mahist army reached the emperor of Xiling's city, it was already the 9th month. After surrounding the emperor of Xiling's city, Mo Xiuyao did not immediately give the order to attack. He only surrounded but did not attack. He took the opportunity to let the soldiers who had been tired for months rest. At this time in the emperor of Xiling's palace, the emperor of Xiling was frowning deeply as he looked at the white-robed youth in front of him. Below the emperor of Xiling, the cultured and elegant Su Qingbai also smiled as he sized up the emperor of Xiling in front of him. The emperor of Xiling was only in his early 50s, but compared to Genom of Gojoseon, who had lost an arm but still had a grand presence, he was not very presentable. Maybe it was because of years of singing and dancing that he was extremely thin. His face was sallow and his eyes were murky. Even his eyelids drooped loosely. He was not old, but he looked lifeless. Su Qingbai did not care as he looked at the emperor of Xiling's palace guards who were staring at him. In reality, he had been in Xiling for many days, but the emperor of Xiling did not plan to see him at first. Maybe the emperor of Xiling did not think that his Xiling army would be so weak in front of the Mahist army. It was only when the Mahist army took Bian City and Feng City in less than half a month's time did he truly start to worry. However, this negotiation, which was related to the fate of the nation, was not so easy to resolve. In addition, the Emperor Xiling's palace guards were, so his attitude was indecisive. Now that the Mo family army was at the city gates and there was no news from the Lord of Jinnan's residence, he could not afford to hesitate any longer. In the northwest, Su Qingbai had been involved in farming in extremely barren areas for many years. However, this didn't erase his innate scholarly aura. In fact, after a few years he had become even gentler and gentler than before. Compared to the Su family, who had different personalities, Su Qingbai was the successor of the Su family's century-old scholarly reputation. He was truly talented. Compared to him, Su Qingshan was too otherworldly, Su Qingze was too cold, Su Qingfeng was more like a warrior, and Su Qingyan was too lively. Only Su Qingbai had a gentle expression and an indifferent smile. He was a real gentleman and no one could hate him. What do you think, Emperor of Xiling? Su Qingbai asked indifferently after a long time. The Emperor of Xiling did not relax because of Su Qingbai's gentle attitude. He still frowned and looked like he was in a difficult position. Su Qingbai said slowly, "Actually, why does the Emperor of Xiling have to be so difficult?" The Prince Ding mansion did not mean to make things difficult for the Emperor of Xiling. We have no other choice. Everyone present, including the Qilin guards who were standing at the door and staring at the guards in the hall, was speechless. They had already attacked the capital, but they did not want to make things difficult. What would be considered as making things difficult? Seeing the Emperor of Xiling's disbelieving expression, Su Qingbai smiled and said, "If not for Genom of Gojoseon's ambition to attack the Dechu state, our Prince Ding mansion would not have made things difficult for the Emperor of Xiling." The Emperor of Xiling frowned and said, "As far as I know, the Mahist army has already cut ties with Eastern Chu. Fourth young Master Su, please do not use these words to fool me. Even if he was a puppet, he was still an emperor." Su Qingbai using these words to fool him was simply mocking his intelligence. Su Qingbai did not mind and shook his head helplessly. Although our Prince Ding mansion has no intention of interfering in the affairs of the Dechu state, the Emperor of Xiling should also know that the northwest is small and barren. If Genom of Gojoseon were to take over the Dechu state, with Genom of Gojoseon's ambition, would he not make things difficult for the Prince Ding mansion? The Emperor of Xiling was silent. Su Qingbai's words had somewhat convinced him. In reality, he also understood that Su Qingbai's words were mostly sophistry. However, under these circumstances, people were far more likely to accept such sophistry than usual. Therefore, the Emperor of Xiling could not help but think that if Genom of Gojoseon had not attacked the Dechu state, would Emo Xiuyao not have attacked Xiling? Most importantly, Lei Jinting attacking the Dechu state was one thing, but he had actually taken away Xiling's most elite troops and horses. When Xiling was in danger, he did not even consider coming back to help. Instead, he continued to attack the Dechu state. This matter made the Emperor of Xiling very unhappy. Seeing the Emperor of Xiling's silence, Su Qingbai continued, "The Emperor of Xiling must also understand that with Xiling's current military strength, the imperial city will definitely not be able to be defended. Moreover, even if the Prince Ding mansion retreats now, can the Emperor of Xiling withstand the military strength of the various countries in the western region? As far as I know, the small countries in the western region have already formed an alliance of 15 countries, leading 600,000 troops to the border. They want to take revenge for the blood debt of the Xiling army in the western region in the past." Hearing this, the Emperor of Xiling could not help but tremble. How many people had Long Yang killed in the western region back then? It was impossible to count. In the past hundreds of years, many people in the western region had lived under Xiling's tyranny. It could be said that the hatred between them and Xiling was as deep as the sea. However, Xiling's military strength had always been strong, so these small countries could only swallow their anger. However, enduring silently did not mean that they were willing to submit. Xiling had just been defeated by the Mahist army, and these small countries were already ready to make a move. The Xiling Emperor knew that he would never be able to defeat Emo Xiuyao, nor would he be able to deal with the countries of the western regions who hated the Xiling Emperor. Just like how he always knew that he could not defeat his younger brother, Genom of Gojoseon, he had always been very sensible. After a long while, the Emperor of Xiling finally spoke. "Fourth young Master Su, what do you want to say?" Su Qingbai raised his eyebrows slightly, knowing that the Emperor of Xiling was shocked and relaxed. He smiled faintly and said, "As long as the Emperor of Xiling gives up the Emperor of Xiling city, all the cities that the Mahist army had previously taken over will belong to the northwest. The Mahist army will immediately withdraw. Isn't it good for both sides to coexist peacefully?" The Emperor of Xiling almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Coexist peacefully. The Mahist army had taken over 1/3 of Xiling's territory, and now he was talking about coexisting peacefully with him? The Emperor of Xiling shook his head and said, "The imperial city is out of the question. As long as Prince Ding withdraws his troops immediately, the land that the Mahist army had previously occupied can be given to the Prince Ding mansion. In addition, I can also add in the Qingyang province. The Qingyang province borders the Dechu state, and its area is twice the size of the Anping province where the imperial city is located. The imperial city was the capital and foundation of Xiling. If he lost the imperial city, how could he continue to be an emperor? Would he have to follow the example of the Dechu state's emperor? Chapter 684. Speaking of which, Xiling and the Dechu state were indeed of the same origin. Back then, the cavalry rebelled against the previous dynasty and established a country not long after. After that, Xiling became strong and so did the Dechu state. The Dechu state was in chaos and so was Xiling. For 100 or 200 years, no one gained any advantage over the other. Now, the new emperor of the Dechu state could not escape, and the emperor of Xiling's city was also under siege. Su Qingbai waved his fan and shook his head. Emperor of Xiling, does the city of Xiling really mean anything to you? The so-called imperial city is the place of the emperor. As long as the emperor is still around, where can't the imperial city be built? In this situation, even if the imperial city is saved, can you really live in peace? The emperor of Xiling was silent. At the same time, he could not help but blame his ancestor for choosing the wrong location for the imperial city. The emperor of Xiling's city was less than 600 or 700 miles away from the borders of the western region. In the past, when Xiling was strong, it was easy to ask for rare tributes from the small countries of the western region, such as beautiful women and rare horses. But once Xiling declined, the cavalry of the western region countries could even reach the imperial city in a few days. Moreover, in the future he would have to live next to the Mahist army. The emperor of Xiling felt like he was sitting on pins and needles whenever he thought about it. After being reminded by Su Qingbai, the emperor of Xiling suddenly felt that the imperial city was a little difficult to handle. He did not want to face the strong Mahist army in front of him, and then face the western region countries who were eyeing him covetously. But the emperor of Xiling could not bring himself to give away the imperial city so easily. How could Su Qingbai not understand his thoughts? He was not in a hurry. He smiled faintly and said, "It's okay. Emperor of Xiling, why don't you think about it carefully for a few days? Of course, if our two armies can settle peacefully, the Prince Ding mansion will not take the emperor of Xiling's city for free." Such a clear hint made the emperor of Xiling's heart move, and he looked at Su Qingbai questioningly. Su Qingbai smiled faintly and said, "The emperor of Xiling's family has always been suppressed by Genom of Gojoseon. If Genom of Gojoseon had not eliminated dissidents, how would the three famous generals of Xiling have declined? If Xiling and the Prince Ding mansion live peacefully together, they would naturally be friends. Isn't it normal for friends to support each other?" The emperor of Xiling's eyes lit up. No matter how capable he was still an emperor and a man. As an emperor, if he didn't have the slightest desire for power, then he wouldn't be sitting in this position. The price that Su Qingbai offered was undoubtedly very attractive. If the Prince Ding mansion helped him suppress Enchanting, then he could control the court and become the real emperor of Xiling. So what if Xiling was only left with 2/3 of its territory? Wasn't he just as powerless now? He was not even as free as an ordinary marquis. Su Qingbai understood that going too far was as bad as falling short, so he did not say anything more. He stood up leisurely and said goodbye to the emperor of Xiling, leaving him some time to think. Before he left, he did not forget to say, "Your Majesty, it is not your fault that Xiling is like this." Watching Su Qingbai leave calmly, the emperor of Xiling could not help but feel a little absent-minded and jealous. Even if Su Qingbai was just a young man who did not even have a formal official title. But the bearing and ease he showed in front of him, the emperor of a country, made him jealous. At the same time, Su Qingbai's last words were deeply imprinted in his mind. Yes, it was not his fault. It was really Enchanting's fault. "Your Majesty?" The chamberlain beside him came forward to serve him hot tea and said carefully. The emperor of Xiling lowered his head and took a sip of the tribute tea he was used to drinking. Only then did he let out a long sigh of relief and asked casually, "Do you think the imperial city can be defended?" "Your Majesty is wise and mighty. Xiling will live for 1,000 years. Of course we can defend it," the chamberlain said respectfully, although he did not believe what he said. Fortunately, the emperor of Xiling did not mean to question whether his words were true or not. He nodded silently and said, "Fine, let's wait and see." The chamberlain silently waited on the side. He was someone who served the emperor of Xiling all year round. Just by looking at his expression he could guess the emperor of Xiling's intentions. This time was no exception. But he was only a small chamberlain. It was not his place to say much about the matters of the country. In the large tent of the Mahist army outside the imperial city, all the generals of the Mahist army gathered and discussed. The Mahist army had attacked the emperor of Shiling's city like a hot knife through butter. But the prince ordered them to only surround and not attack. This made many generals puzzled. Shouldn't they take the imperial city while the army was at its peak? Feng-san, what are the prince and Wang Fei thinking? Others could not ask, but Zhang Qilin did not mind. He directly asked Feng Jiao, who had been with Emo Xiao the longest. Feng Jiao looked at the top of the tent and rolled his eyes. How would I know what the prince is thinking? I am not a bug in the prince's stomach. A deputy general hesitated and asked, is the prince planning to retreat? With these words the others did not speak. They naturally knew the news that the emperor of Dechu state was heading south. Even though they did not want to have any relationship with the imperial house of Dechu state, they did have feelings for the people of Dechu state. Even though they had not seen the situation in Dechu state with their own eyes, they could guess a bit. So it was hard to avoid guessing if the prince was planning to retreat. Actually, there is nothing wrong with retreating. What if the prince wants to reinforce the Dechu state? Someone asked hesitantly. After all, they were of the same origin as the people of Dechu state. Most of the people in the Mahist army had relatives and friends in Dechu state. If the prince really planned to send troops to Dechu state, no one would object. No matter how much the Mahist army hated the imperial house of Dechu state, it had nothing to do with the commoners. After all, people's hearts were made of flesh. Also, the northern tribes and the Mahist army have a huge grudge. If the prince really plans to do so, we naturally will not object. Back then, the previous prince Ding Emoshuan, and the tens of thousands of Mahist army soldiers who had died in vain, plus the battle that year, at least 200,000 Mahist army soldiers had died in the hands of the northern tribes. What are you all talking about? Yi Li's elegant voice came from outside the tent. Everyone hurriedly stood up and bowed. Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li walked in hand. There was a faint warmth between their brows. It was obvious that they were in a good mood. Greetings to the prince, princess. Emo Xiuyao led Yi Li to the main seat and sat down. He raised his brows and smiled at the generals. Princess is asking, what is everyone talking about? Yun Ting was suddenly pushed forward. He looked around helplessly at his colleagues who were all looking down their noses. He could only say, reporting to your highness, we are all guessing when your highness plans to attack the city. Seeing Yun Ting's serious expression, Yi Li could not help but smile. Don't be nervous, Prince and I are just casually asking. Sit down and talk. Thank you, princess. Yun Ting heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly returned to sit beside Chen Yun. Chapter 685. Emo Xiuyao looked at the generals below with a smile that wasn't a smile and asked, you all want to know when to attack the city? The generals all nodded. They were anxiously waiting. They were about to attack the emperor of Shiling's city. This was a feat that the Mahist army hadn't achieved in the past 200 years. Emo Xiuyao looked at them with a smile and said, I don't plan to attack the imperial city. Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but reveal a shocked expression. Although they had some guesses, when they really heard Prince say this, they were still a little surprised. Moreover, if they didn't plan to attack the city, they didn't need to come at all. They could just go back home. Could it be that the Shiling army that was scared of them along the way dared to chase after them? Prince, why don't you attack? Yun Ting couldn't help but raise his hand and ask. Everyone's gaze immediately turned to Emo Xiuyao. Emo Xiuyao asked faintly, to attack Bian City, how many soldiers did the Mahist army lose? Everyone was silent. Although the Mahist army's journey could be said to be a rare success, Bian City still lost many soldiers. However, Bian City still lost a lot of soldiers. Preliminary calculations showed that Bian City had lost close to 80,000 to 90,000 soldiers. It was almost the sum of the losses before and after the battle. Now that the army was near the emperor of Shiling's city, the reason why there were still 300,000 soldiers was because LV Songxian had sent over 100,000 more elite soldiers. These were the Mahist army's most elite soldiers. Emo Xiuyao said, although the emperor of Shiling's city doesn't have as long a history as Bian City, its defensive capabilities are definitely better than Bian City's. In addition, the last of Ai's three great generals, Shuntian General Feng Ao, is currently in the imperial city. The Mahist army can indeed attack the emperor of Shiling's city, but I don't want to pay that many losses. In addition, I don't want to destroy the city's defenses. The imperial city wasn't that old, only about 150 years ago. It was a city that the Shilin kingdom had spent over 10 years to build. When the West Hill was first established, the kingdoms of the western region were restless. The two founding emperors of West Hill dared to choose a place close to the border as their imperial city. One had to say that they were extraordinarily courageous. Perhaps there was also a hint of warning for future generations to be constantly vigilant. Once the Mahist army took over the entire northern part of Shilin, the former border of Shilin would become the border of the Mahist army. This former imperial city would become the last and most solid defense for the countries of the western region. Then, what does Prince plan to do? We can't just waste time like this or not fight, right? Zhang Qilan asked. Mo Shuyao smiled but did not answer. Everyone looked at Yi Li. Yi Li lowered her eyebrows and smiled faintly. There is a saying in the art of war. The best strategy is to attack the enemy's plans. Next is to attack the enemy's allies. Next is to attack the enemy's army. The best strategy is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Everyone was in awe. Princess Consort was really heavenly. Feng Jiao touched his nose and thought silently in his heart. Which military book mentioned this? Yun Ting looked at her with admiration. Princess Consort is well read. I have been reading military books for 3 whole months and I still haven't seen it. Ahem. Feng Jiao coughed lightly and respectfully asked for advice. Princess Consort means to subdue the enemy without fighting? I'm afraid it's not that easy. Even if the Emperor of Shilin was really a fool, the officials of the West Hill Imperial Court would not agree to give up the imperial city just like that. That was the imperial city, the capital of a country, not a piece of potato. Yi Li smiled and said, "Won't we know if it works later?" Zhang Qilan frowned and asked, "If we don't attack the city, then what if there are reinforcements?" Mo Shuyao glanced at him indifferently and said, "What do we do? Of course we kill them. Don't worry about the imperial city. If there are any reinforcements from the Shilin army during this period, kill them all." Everyone then let out a sigh of relief. They still had to fight. However, they would definitely have an advantage in a field battle compared to a siege. "Yobei." Everyone replied in unison. Feng Jiao was deep in thought. "Shli, this was also a psychological attack, right? Princess Consort, there is someone outside the camp who came from the Emperor of Shilin City and wants to see you." The guard at the door came in and reported. Mo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and asked, "Who is it?" The guard said, "It's said to be the 4th young master of the Su family. However, he doesn't have a token from the Prince Ding mansion, so..." Su Qingbai was different from Su Qingchen and Su Qingze, who were often in Glass City. He was also different from Su Qingfeng, who was in the army camp. Not many people in the Mahist army knew him. Especially the ordinary soldiers in the lower ranks, there were even fewer people who knew him. Therefore, according to the rules, they still had to come in and report his arrival before letting him into the camp. Yi Li was delighted when she heard this. "4th brother is here?" Mo Shuyao pulled Yi Li up and smiled. "Since that's the case, let's go out and welcome the 4th young master. I feel that he will bring us good news." Everyone was also curious. Why would the 4th young master of the Su family be in the Emperor of Shilin City? More importantly, what kind of good news would he bring them? When the group walked out of the camp, someone had already come out to welcome Su Qingbai. It was Su Qingfeng, who had gone out for a stroll because he had nothing to do. Su Qingfeng was shocked to see his 4th brother, who was supposed to be planting potatoes in the northwest, mysteriously appear in West Hill. Moreover, he came out of the imperial city. He pulled Su Qingbai over and examined him for a long time. After confirming that he was not injured at all, he asked, "4th brother, why are you here? Does eldest aunt know?" Su Qingbai was in a good mood when faced with his 3rd brother's undisguised relationship. He shook his head and smiled. "3rd brother, seems like you're doing well?" Su Qingfeng was in high spirits. He smiled and said, "Of course, your 3rd brother has made a lot of contributions this time. Qingfeng said that when we go back he will promote me to the deputy commander of the Qilin." Although Su Qingfeng understood that it was more or less because of his cousin's face. After all, he was not the only commander of the team who had made contributions. However, he also knew that Qingfeng was definitely not someone who could not distinguish between public and private affairs. At least this showed that Qingfeng recognized his ability. Then I have to congratulate you, third brother. Su Qingbai smiled. Su Qingfeng's smile faded. He said, you still haven't told me why you are here. If eldest aunt knows that you came here, she will be scared to death. Su Qingbai smiled helplessly and said, father and big brother both know. When I'm done here, I will also write a letter to tell them that I'm safe. Third brother, I have something to discuss with Li and Prince Ding. Third brother. As they were talking, Yi Li and Emo Shuyao had already walked out. Behind them was a large group of people. Su Qingbai could not help but feel a little flattered. How was it? Emo Shuyao asked faintly. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. Su Qingbai smiled. Chapter 686. After welcoming Su Qingbai into the camp, he dismissed the curious young generals, leaving behind only Feng Jiao, Zhang Qilan and the others. Only then did the large tent become quiet again. Feng Jiao looked curiously at Su Qingbai and said, Fourth young master Su, when did you arrive in Xiling? We didn't know anything about it. Su Qingbai smiled at Yi Li, who was looking at him, and said, I've been here for a few days. I originally thought that you would take a few more days to arrive. When he said this, Feng Jiao and the others understood that Su Qingbai had most likely been secretly sent to the emperor of Xiling by the prince and Wang Fei. As for why he had come, looking at Su Qingbai's gentle and elegant smile, Feng Jiao's eyes flashed with understanding. Fourth brother, did you suffer any grievances these days? Although Yi Li saw that Su Qingbai was safe and sound, she felt much more at ease. But she was still worried that fourth brother had suffered some grievances in Xiling. After all, the people of Xiling didn't have the saying that the Dechu state treated scholars well. Before the Mahist army arrived, the people of Xiling probably wouldn't have been so polite to fourth brother. Su Qingbai smiled and comforted her. It's nothing. We just didn't talk much in Xiling. Now that you've arrived early, things will be much smoother. Emo Shuyao drank tea and stared patiently at Yi Li and Su Qingbai. After the greetings were over, he asked, Does the Emperor of Xiling have any plans? Su Qingbai nodded and said, Yesterday I saw the Emperor of Xiling again. The pressure of the army is great for him. And the conditions we offered are enough for him to be tempted. But I'm afraid that he can't bring himself to give up the imperial city. I'm afraid that we will have to fight 2 more battles. The reinforcements from various places should have arrived in the next few days. I think that if we beat back 2 of them, he will give the order to awaken. Emo Shuyao nodded. I understand. Thank you for your hard work. Su Qingbai smiled and said, It's my duty. How is it hard? Only then did Zhang Qilan recover his wits. He looked at Su Qingbai with a dumbfounded expression. After a while he said, Prince means that we don't need to attack the imperial city. Fourth young master Su persuaded the Emperor of Xiling to give us the imperial city? Zhang Qilan looked at Su Qingbai as if he was looking at a monster. Su Qingbai smiled humbly and said, It's not for free. Naturally, we have to compensate him with something. Zhang Qilan waved his hand and said, This is the imperial city of the Western Tomb. Even if we replenish anything, we'll still benefit from it. Fourth young master Su has such ability at such a young age. I've heard that the Su family's second young master Su was able to battle a group of scholars when he was in his teens. Now it seems that fourth young master Su has surpassed him. Zhang Qilan couldn't help but click his tongue in his heart. The Su family was too terrifying. Just by relying on their mouths, they were more powerful than hundreds of thousands of soldiers and horses. There was also the eldest young master of the Su family. He'd heard that even the prince, who was usually busy with government affairs, could easily handle them neatly. Speaking of which, the prince had such a group of brothers-in-law. Unconsciously, Zhang Qilan looked at Emo Shuyao with sympathy. The others naturally noticed Zhang Qilan's gaze and expression. Emo Shuyao's face immediately darkened. Although he also felt that these brothers-in-law, other than Su Qingfeng, were easier to deal with, the others were more annoying than the other. But in any case, these people were very useful. Compared to their abilities, being annoyed by them occasionally was insignificant to Emo Shuyao. Even so, he didn't want to see his subordinates sympathize with him. Feng Jiao lowered his head and coughed to hide the smile on his lips. He asked, Fourth young master, are you confident? The Emperor of Xiling is an emperor after all. Is he really willing to give up the foundation of the West Hill? Su Qingbai smiled and said, In the eyes of the Emperor of Xiling, his life and throne are obviously more important than a royal city that can be rebuilt. Moreover, given the current situation with the countries in the western region in turmoil, this place is obviously no longer suitable to be the royal city. Even if we don't want it, I'm guessing that in less than 3 months he will want to move the capital. Zhang Qilan frowned slightly and said, if that's the case, what do we need this city for? Are we going to fight the countries in the western region? Although they weren't afraid of the small countries in the western region, they had their own matters to attend to. The northwest was still surrounded by the troops of the northern tribes and Genom of Gojoseon. How could they have the time to deal with the small countries in the western region? Yi Li smiled faintly and said, General Zhang, it's the West Hill that has enmity with the countries in the western region, not us. Zhang Qilan was half a soldier and wasn't proficient in politics. He asked in confusion, what do you mean, princess? Yi Li smiled faintly and said, the countries in the western region have deep enmity with the West Hill, but we don't have any enmity with them. The territories that were invaded by the West Hill are not within the scope of our current control. We didn't get any of the goods that were plundered by the West Hill. Although the West Hill has been caught unprepared by us and can't catch its breath for a while, 2/3 of its area is still there. When it catches its breath, a centipede dies but never falls down. If the countries in the western region want revenge, they will definitely not make another enemy for themselves at this time. And we need this road to connect the countries in the western region and even further places. Feng Xiao clapped his hands and said with a smile, I understand. After taking these places, the Prince Ding Mansion's area of control will be able to directly connect the countries in the western region. In the future, if we want to trade with the western region, we won't have to worry about being cut off by the West Hill. The Northwest is poor in resources, but it can definitely become a trade route that connects the countries in the East and West. Moreover, with this kind of terrain we can advance and retreat, attack and defend. Mo Shuyao nodded and praised, Feng San is right. Zhang Qilan nodded and said, I see. Since there are so many benefits, we naturally have to take the city of the Emperor of Xiling. After Su Qingbai told Yi Li and the others about the past 2 months and discussed some matters regarding the negotiations with the Emperor of Xiling, he got up and prepared to return to the city. Yi Li said with some worry, Fourth brother, you should stay in the barracks. If the Emperor of Xiling suddenly goes back on his word. Although the possibility wasn't high, it wasn't completely impossible. Yi Li didn't want any harm to come to her fourth brother. Su Qingbai patted Yi Li's shoulder with a smile and said, Don't worry, nothing will happen. Moreover, if I, the envoy for the negotiations, run away first, the Emperor of Xiling won't believe in our sincerity. But Yi Li was still worried. Su Qingbai smiled and said, As long as the envoys know their limits, they won't be in any danger. Moreover, we obviously have the upper hand now. What's the point of the Emperor of Xiling harming me? At most it's to vent his anger. He was able to endure under Genom of Gojoseon for so many years, so he won't be such a hot-blooded person. Don't worry. Fourth brother will go back first. Yi Li thought for a moment and said, I'll ask third brother to bring some people back with you. Su Qingbai had no choice but to agree, hoping that she wouldn't worry. He nodded and said, That's fine, but there can't be too many people. Yi Li nodded and quickly asked Zhuo Jing to invite Su Qingfeng. Chapter 687. Su Qingfeng was naturally more than happy to accompany Su Qingbai to the imperial city. Even though they were only cousins, the relationship between the 5 brothers of the Su family had always been deeper than that of real brothers. Su Qingfeng was also worried about his fourth brother, who had always been gentle and polite. When Yi Li said this, Su Qingfeng immediately agreed without even thinking about it. He picked his 6th brother, Qi Lin, from his subordinates to follow Su Qingbai back to the imperial city. As Su Qingbai expected, the Emperor of Xiling persisted for a few more days. 5 days later, after the Mahist army consecutively defeated 2 groups of Xiling army reinforcements to the imperial city, the Emperor of Xiling finally couldn't help but summon Su Qingbai again. No one knew what Su Qingbai said to the Emperor of Xiling. That day the Emperor of Xiling issued an imperial edict to the world. The war between the Prince Ding Mansion and the West Hill was caused by Enchanting of Genom of Gojoseon sending troops to attack the Dechu state without permission. After that, not only did Genom of Gojoseon not return to help, But he also continued to send troops south to attack the south of the Dechu state. As a result, the imperial city was now under siege. The Emperor of Xiling empathized with the suffering of the people and the soldiers of the West Hill and negotiated peace with the Prince Ding mansion. He ceded Onping Lingyang Tongping Shenhong Pingchuan and the Prince Ding mansion. The capital of the West Hill would be moved to An City, which was located in the center of the West Hill, within 2 months. Once this edict was announced, not only was the imperial court shocked, even the rulers of the distant countries were shocked. Even though they didn't take over the entire West Hill, the Mahist army took over 1/3 of the West Hill, including the imperial city, in less than 3 months. This kind of combat strength made people wary and fearful. Moreover, this was not the full strength of the Mahist army. After the announcement of the Emperor of Xiling's edict, the Mahist army was in a state of jubilation, unlike the shock, fear, and anger elsewhere. On the 9th day after the Mahist army besieged the imperial city, the gates of the West Hill imperial city were finally opened. The Mahist army took down the most fortified city in the West Hill with almost no casualties. It could be said that they did it without shedding a drop of blood. Because West Hill did not completely surrender to the Mahist army, the Emperor of Xiling did not come out of the city to welcome the Mahist army. He only sent the ministers of the imperial court to follow Su Qingbai to the city gate to welcome him. Even so, the faces of many of the West Hill's officials were still very ugly. Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li each rode a horse side by side. Behind them were Feng Zhiyao, Qin Feng Zhuijing, and the others dressed in red. Behind them were the Black Cloud Cavalry, also dressed in black and riding black horses. They were already part of the infantry. In order not to frighten the people in the city, the Mahist army did not all enter the city. They only brought 10,000 people into the city. The hundreds of thousands of soldiers under them were left outside the city for Zhang Qilan to command. Even though there were rumors of a massacre in Bian City, the aftermath was handled well. Moreover, the Mahist army did not harm the people along the way. The ordinary people in the Emperor of Xiling's city were not afraid of the Mahist army. They crowded on both sides of the street to watch the show. When they saw that the pair at the front was Prince Ding and Princess Ding, countless envious gazes fell on them. When they entered the main hall of the Emperor of Xiling's palace, the Emperor of Xiling came out to welcome them. When he saw the two people standing side by side, he could not help but be stunned. After all, even if Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li were not the most famous people in the world, they could definitely be called household names. Moreover, Mo Xiuyao became famous too early. There were many people who were not familiar with him in the middle. It was easy for people who were not familiar with him to classify him as one of the people of the previous generation. At this time, when he looked at the man and woman in front of him, although the man had a head of white hair, his face was handsome and his aura was awe-inspiring. The woman's face was beautiful and elegant. She was graceful and graceful, giving people a sense of magnanimity and confidence. Just looking at their age, they were only in their 20s. Such people, no matter which one it was, were without a doubt the most outstanding people in the world. Ah, Prince Ding, Princess Ding, Zhen has been looking forward to meeting you for a long time. Seeing you today, Zhen, really is impressive. Fortunately, the Emperor of Xiling quickly reacted and withdrew his gaze from Yi Li's body. Although he had some shortcomings, it was not to the point where he was blinded by lust. He was still very clear on what kind of woman he could look at and what kind of woman he could not look at. Mo Xiuyao glanced at him indifferently and withdrew his gradually cold gaze. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Your Majesty is too polite. If we have offended Your Majesty, please forgive us." "Not at all. Your Highness is too serious. Prince Ding, Your Highness, please come in. Zhen has already ordered people to prepare some wine. Please do not dislike it." Seeing that Yi Li had spoken before Mo Xiuyao, and that Prince Ding did not show any displeasure on his face, the Emperor of Xiling was even more certain of Princess Ding's position in Prince Ding's heart. What he did not know was that Yi Li had helped him out by speaking first. Otherwise, he was afraid that his passionate love would be snubbed and he would not be able to back down in front of so many officials. "Your Majesty, please." When the group entered the main hall, they discovered that the Xiling Imperial Palace was exceptionally simple. Not to mention the dazzling splendor of the Dechu state, there were not even many precious decorations. The entire hall appeared empty, making people feel cool and bleak for no reason. Feng Zhiyao looked in puzzlement at Su Qingbai sitting below him. He remembered the news that the Prince Ding mansion had received. This emperor of Xiling was not extremely extravagant, but he was not a thrifty person either. Su Qingbai looked with a shadow of a smile at the emperor of Xiling, who was chatting with Emo Xiuyao with a smile. Feng Jiao blinked. Looking at the smiling emperor of Xiling in the hall, he suddenly understood. It seemed that the capital was going to be moved. The emperor of Xiling was worried that the Prince Ding mansion would take a fancy to the treasures in his palace and had hidden them beforehand. In the hall, the emperor of Xiling looked at Emo Xiuyao and said, "Prince Ding, I had someone deliver the letter yesterday. Does Prince Ding have any objections?" Emo Xiuyao leaned back in his chair and raised his hand to take a letter from Zhuojing behind him. He said lightly, "The emperor of Xiling's conditions can be agreed to by the Prince Ding mansion. Except for one thing. Please forgive me for not being able to help with the matter of Nanzhao." The emperor of Xiling's smile immediately froze. He forced a smile and said, "How can that be? Prince Ding is resourceful. As long as he sincerely helps, how can I not be able to help?" Now the Prince Ding mansion was not the only enemy in Xiling. The Nanzhao kingdom in the south and various small countries in the west were all eyeing them covetously. Nanzhao had even sent troops to occupy a state bordering Xiling in Nanzhao. Emo Xiuyao said in a low voice, "The northwest and Nanzhao are too far apart. If we ask the Mahist army to help Xiling block Nanzhao, first of all, it is not justifiable. Second, the journey is long. When the Mahist army arrives, they will be exhausted. I'm afraid that they will fall into Nanzhao's trap." The emperor of Xiling smiled and said, "That's not what I meant." Even if Emo Xiuyao really wanted to send troops for him, he did not dare to accept it. Now he only hoped that Emo Xiuyao and the Mahist army would obediently stay in the territory they had already obtained and not harm the rest of his land. Asking the Mahist army to help drive away Nanzhao's troops was undoubtedly driving away the wolf and winning the tiger. Emo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows questioningly. The emperor of Xiling smiled and said, "Prince Ding's name shakes the world. I believe that as long as Prince Ding expresses himself, Nanzhao will naturally restrain itself." In reality, the emperor of Xiling did not really care about Nanzhao. But now he not only had to deal with the countries in the west, he also had to prepare to deal with Enchanting. He had no time to tangle with Nanzhao. This time, he did not want to be a puppet again. Moreover, he had given up the imperial city. The emperor of Xiling knew that if he gave Enchanting a chance to come back, his days would not be easy. Chapter 688. Emo Xiuyao understood and nodded with a smile. "That's not a problem. I'll send a letter to the Queen of Nanzhao later." As for the former Princess Anxi, the current Queen of Nanzhao didn't care if she listened or not after reading the letter. Receiving a satisfactory answer, the smile on the Emperor of Xiling's face became even wider. Looking at Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li, his gaze became even more sincere. If the Prince Ding mansion could help him pacify Nanzhao and deal with Enchanting, then the imperial city wouldn't be a loss. Prince Ding, to be honest. Even though we've already decided to move the capital to An City. But, as far as I know, Ai's nephew Lei Tingfeng is still within Xiling's borders, and he has many soldiers under his command who support Genom of Gojoseon. This medicine. What should we do? The Emperor of Xiling asked. Emo Xiuyao smiled faintly. Emperor of Xiling, our ancestors have a saying, if the name isn't right, the words won't be right. Enchanting is just a Genom of Gojoseon. He doesn't even have a proper title of regent. And Lei Tingfeng is just a Genom of Gojoseon. Could it be that the Emperor of Xiling can't even deal with him? The Emperor of Xiling smiled bitterly. Lei Tingfeng isn't scary, but the soldiers under his command and the people who are loyal to Jinnan Palace can't be underestimated. Emo Xiuyao supported his forehead with one hand and smiled faintly. As far as I know, Great General Shuntian is in the imperial city right now. Presumably, he'll follow the Emperor of Xiling to An City? The Emperor of Xiling's expression changed slightly. Feng Ao was indeed in the imperial city, but this news wasn't even told to the people closest to him. Looking at Emo Xiuyao's casual manner, it was obvious that he didn't just find out. The Emperor of Xiling's heart couldn't help but tremble. His fear of Emo Xiuyao increased by another level. Emo Xiuyao didn't seem to see the Emperor of Xiling's expression and continued. Besides, this war started because of Genom of Gojoseon. Could it be that his son wants to make a move against the king who helped them clean up? If so, then the loyalty of Jinnan Palace. Many things didn't need to be said too clearly. The Emperor of Xiling suppressed the shock in his heart and smiled. I understand. Thank you Prince Ding for guidance. The Emperor of Xiling's words are too serious. The main hall was filled with joy and harmony. Just as the host and guests were enjoying themselves, a piercing voice suddenly rushed in from outside. Father! Father! The Emperor of Xiling didn't have time to react before the figure of a gorgeous and graceful woman rushed in. She didn't even look at the people who were still sitting in the hall and shouted at the Emperor of Xiling, Father! Are you really going to give up the imperial city to the Prince Ding mansion? Are you crazy? How can you face the ancestors of Xiling by doing this? The Emperor of Xiling's expression changed and he said sternly, Impudent! Lingyun, you're getting bolder and bolder. Don't you know what kind of place this is? How dare you barge in? Although what he had done had indeed made him unable to raise his head in front of his ancestors and subjects, it was not his daughter's turn to criticize him. Yili looked curiously at the gorgeous woman who rushed in. Who else could it be but the Princess Lingyun who wanted to steal Emo Xiuyao from her? It was 8 or 9 years ago. The arrogant princess who was in her 20s was now almost 30 years old. If Yili didn't look carefully, she wouldn't have recognized the woman in front of her. Princess Lingyun, who was in her late 20s, was still well maintained. Her snow-white skin was picturesque and she was beautiful. It was just that the arrogance of a young girl had become a little arrogant and mean after many years. The gorgeous clothes, delicate eyebrows, and the sharp light in her eyes all showed the personality of the princess. A proud young girl might be moving in a different way, but an arrogant young woman was not so likable in the eyes of men. Am I wrong? Princess Lingyun raised her chin proudly and glared at her father, unwilling to admit defeat. The Emperor of Xiling was speechless and fell back on the dragon throne. He was clearly very angry. Feng Jiao rubbed his chin and looked at the shrewish woman in front of him. Even though he hadn't seen this Princess Lingyun before, Feng Jiao had heard of the story of the princess who dared to challenge the Prince Ding mansion and was so scared she couldn't get up. He looked at Princess Lingyun with a smile and said, Is this the princess who competed with the princess consort back then? It seems that her personality is better than before. Wang Fei, maybe you can compete again now? When he said this, Princess Lingyun clearly realized that there were other people in the hall. She first glared angrily at Feng Jiao and then saw the man and woman in white sitting together not far away. She couldn't help but pause. The man that the young and proud princess had admired for a long time and wanted to marry regardless of his disability had completely recovered after so many years. He was even more elegant than before. However, that head of snow-white hair was so dazzling in her eyes. Even though she was far away in West Hill, Princess Lingyun knew everything about Prince Ding. She also knew why his black hair turned white. She couldn't help but look at Yili at the side. Yili met Princess Lingyun's gaze and nodded with a faint smile. Yet Yili's elegant and graceful appearance deeply provoked Princess Lingyun. She looked at her gorgeous and heavy clothes, her body covered in pearls and jade, and the heavy makeup on her face. All of this reminded her that she was no longer the proud and beautiful princess of the past. Anger rushed to her heart. Princess Lingyun pointed at Yili and said, Yili, I want to challenge you. Chapter 689. With these words, the hall instantly fell silent. A moment later, Feng Jiao's laughter rang out in the hall. First it was a low chuckle. Then, as though he could not hold it in any longer, he began to laugh loudly. Princess Lingyun was so embarrassed that she became angry. She glared angrily at Feng Jiao and said, What are you laughing at? Feng Jiao wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. He smiled and waved his hand saying, Nothing, I suddenly felt like laughing so I laughed. Then he turned to Emo Xiuyao and Yili. His lips moved as he soundlessly said a few words. Yili, who was proficient in lip reading, could clearly see that Feng Jiao had said, fatale. Even though Emo Xiuyao did not know what Feng Jiao had said, he could guess from his expression. He glanced dangerously at him and did not respond. Originally, Princess Lingyun had been impulsive. But since she had already said it, she let it go. She raised her chin to look at Yili and asked, How about it? Do you dare? Yili was slightly helpless. She smiled at Princess Lingyun and asked, Princess, why should I accept your challenge? The reason she had accepted the challenge in the past was for Emo Xiuyao, for the Prince Ding mansion and her dignity as Princess Ding. But now, Yili could not think of why she would accept Princess Lingyun's challenge. Looking at Princess Lingyun, she knew that she was already married. She could not possibly still be thinking about Emo Shuyao, right? As for the dignity of the Prince Ding mansion, there was no need for her, the princess consort, to defeat the princess of a defeated country to prove herself. You don't dare. Princess Lingyun looked disdainfully at Yili. Yili smiled and said, I don't need it. She didn't need to accept Princess Lingyun's challenge. In this world, no one would dare to say that she wasn't good enough for Emo Shuyao, or that she wasn't good enough to be Princess Ding. Upon hearing this, Princess Lingyun's expression turned even uglier. Yili was right. She did not need to accept her challenge. To put it bluntly, with Princess Lingyun's current reputation and status, she had no right to challenge Princess Ding. The Emperor of Xiling saw that the atmosphere was a little awkward and hurriedly said, Lingyun has been spoiled by Zhen since she was young. She doesn't know the severity of the situation. Princess, please forgive her. Princess Lingyun opened her mouth, wanting to say something. The Emperor of Xiling fiercely glared at her and sternly said, Why don't you take a look at where this is? Why aren't you leaving? Emo Shuyao held Yi Li's hand as he stood up. He smiled at the Emperor of Xiling and said, Emperor of Xiling, since we've already reached an agreement, I will return to the Emperor of Xiling. I and the Princess Consort will return to the guest house to rest. Princess Li is a bit tired these past few days. The Emperor of Xiling quickly smiled and said, Why don't Prince Ding and the Princess Consort stay in the palace for the time being? Zhen has already ordered people to clean out the palace for Prince Ding's group. Emo Shuyao waved his hand and said with a smile, There's no need. I'm not picky about where I live. I'll leave first. Zhen has already prepared a welcoming banquet for Prince Ding and the Princess Consort. Yili smiled faintly and said, Many thanks to the Emperor of Xiling for the trouble. But I'm a bit tired. Today I can only thank the Emperor of Xiling for his kindness. Since Prince Ding and the Princess Consort had said so, the Emperor of Xiling couldn't force them to stay. He could only have people send them out. Emo Shuyao held Yi Li's hand as they walked in front of Princess Lingyun. They paused for a moment before continuing to walk out. Seeing Emo Xuyao's group leave the main hall, the Emperor of Xiling finally let out a sigh of relief. He turned his gaze to Princess Lingyun and said with a frown, Lingyun, you? Princess Lingyun's face paled and she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. The Emperor of Xiling jumped in fright and hurriedly ordered people to support Princess Lingyun. He asked, What's going on? Even though this daughter had put him on the spot, she was still his own daughter. Seeing her suddenly spit out blood, the Emperor of Xiling was still slightly worried. The Tai came quickly and took Princess Lingyun's pulse. He said with confusion, How did the princess suddenly get an internal injury? The other people naturally didn't understand. After all, even though Princess Lingyun had said she wanted to challenge Princess Ding, they hadn't fought. The other people in the hall hadn't even touched Princess Lingyun. How did she suddenly get an internal injury? Prince Ding. Princess Lingyun raised a hand to wipe away the blood at the corner of her mouth and said in a low voice through gritted teeth. These days the entire city of the Emperor of Xiling was in turmoil. The post house in the city occupied by the people of the Prince Ding mansion was much quieter because there were Mahist army soldiers guarding outside. However, there were still all kinds of people who came to see them for all kinds of reasons. Even though the Emperor of Xiling was still in charge of the Emperor of Xiling's family and the imperial court, everyone knew that the city of the Emperor of Xiling already belonged to the Prince Ding mansion. The people who were quick-witted and didn't plan to follow the Emperor of Xiling south to An City couldn't help but have ideas about the Prince Ding mansion. They wanted to find a better future for themselves. In the post house, the city of the Emperor of Xiling in September already had some of the coldness of early winter. Fortunately, there weren't many plants in Xiling's mansion, so it didn't seem desolate. On the side of the fake mountain in the yard, Emo Shuyao and Su Qingbai were sitting facing each other and playing chess. Yili sat next to Emo Shuyao and watched the game. Even Feng Jiao and Su Qingfeng, who were always active, were sitting on the side and watching. Emo Shuyao and Su Qingbai's chess style were not bold people. They played carelessly and had a sense of leisure. Feng Jiao was bored watching on the side and turned to look at Yili sitting next to Emo Shuyao. He smiled and said, Wang Fei, have you heard of the strange things that have happened in the city of the Emperor of Xiling in the past 2 days? Yili looked up at him and was slightly puzzled. Feng Jiao said with a smile, I heard that yesterday was the Autumn Moon Festival in the city of the Emperor of Xiling. It was probably a festival where the daughters of the officials in the city gathered. Did they not send you invitations? Feng Jiao was slightly surprised. Logically, the officials and nobles in the city of the Emperor of Xiling should not be so blind. Especially those who had no intention of going south with the Emperor of Xiling. Yili thought and said, I did receive a few invitations but I rejected them. Did something happen? It's good that you rejected them. I heard that Princess Lingyun went to the Autumn Moon Festival yesterday and was blocked outside the door and not allowed to enter. Feng Jiyao's smile was absolutely filled with schadenfreude. Who asked that woman Princess Lingyun to look so mean? It was one thing but she also looked like her nose was on top of her head. Wasn't this hateful? Young Master Feng San had never been a kind person. Blocked outside the door? Why is that? Yili raised her eyebrows, her interest piqued. No matter how arrogant Princess Lingyun was, she was still the princess of West Hill. She had the right to be arrogant. Most influential people wouldn't go against her, not to mention deliberately slapping her in the face. Feng Jiao said with a smile, I don't know what happened, but the news of Princess Lingyun provoking Princess Ding in the palace has spread all over the city. Speaking of which, the nobles in West Hill also know about Princess Lingyun's incident in the Dechu state. Now it is being talked about again. Coincidentally, the people in charge of the Autumn Moon Festival this year are the wealthy merchants of West Hill City, the Sun family. Since the Murong family was destroyed, the Sun family rose rapidly. It is not an exaggeration to say that they are now the richest family in the imperial city. They were once officials of West Hill who gave up their official position and went into business. They have always been at odds with Princess Lingyun. Now that the imperial city has changed hands, why would they care about Princess Lingyun? Chapter 690. The Sun Family? Su Qingbai, who was playing chess, raised his head and asked. Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows and smiled. Why? Fourth young master, do you remember them? Su Qingbai nodded and said, Not long after I arrived at West Hill, the head of the Sun family sent someone to deliver gifts. The Sun family should have sent many gifts to the post house in the past 2 days, right? Mo Shuyao lowered his head and continued to think about his chess moves. Yili and Feng Jiao looked at Zhuijing, who was standing at the side. These matters were handled by Zhuijing and Lin Han. Zhuijing thought and said, The head of the Sun family sent many gifts these days. In addition, young Master Zhang of the Sun family personally came to see us once. However, the prince and princess consort said that they did not want to see anyone, so I returned. Yili was puzzled and asked, Fourth brother, is there a problem with the Sun family? Su Qingbai shook his head and said, No, I just feel that the head of the Sun family has a unique vision. When I first came to West Hill, they were the only ones in the entire imperial city who came forward to make friends. Feng Jiao did not mind and said lightly, maybe he wants to please both sides. Businessmen don't like to put all their chips in one basket. Su Qingbai shook his head and said, with the Sun family's current wealth and status, they can't afford to act casually. If you didn't come quickly, the Sun family would be in trouble in a few days. Now, do you think the Emperor of Xiling is willing to leave so much of the Sun family's wealth to the Prince Ding mansion? Yili pondered for a moment and said, So, the head of the Sun family will come to see us again very soon. Yesterday's matter was just the Sun family's attitude towards the Prince Ding mansion? Su Qingbai put down a chess piece and said with a smile, You can say that. This matter, what does the prince think? Feng Jiao looked at Mo Shuyao with a smile. In the past few days they had received many gifts. Needless to say, gold, silver, jewelry, rare antiques and rare treasures were not rare either. However, there were still quite a few stunning beauties that made people not know whether to laugh or cry. Among these beauties, there were some famous courtesans and dancers, but there were also some younger sisters and daughters of the rich merchants in West Hill. Even though everyone in the world knew that Ding Wang had deep feelings for Ding Wang Fei, but it was inevitable that there would be some people who wanted to give it a try with a fluke mentality. As a result, for the first time in his life, Prince Ding was chased out of the princess consort's bedroom to sleep in the study. Feng Jiao, who was watching from the side, could not help but express that Prince had been wronged. Mo Shuyao glanced at Feng Jiao indifferently. He casually threw down the chess piece in his hand and said indifferently, Didn't we say that these trivial matters can be left to Qing Bai to handle? After saying this, he glanced at Yi Li, who was sitting beside him. Su Qingbai was Li's cousin. Of course, he knew how to handle things so that Li would not be unhappy. In reality, towards those who came to offer gifts, especially those who did not have eyes, Mo Xiao's idea was to just kill them. However, it was clear that not only would his subordinates oppose this idea, even Li would not agree. Seeing that Mo Xiao had no intention of playing chess, Su Qingbai put down the chess piece with a smile. He looked with a shadow of a smile at Yi Li and Mo Xiao. Of course, he knew that Prince Ding had been chased out of the house to sleep in the study for 2 days. He was also slightly surprised. It had to be known that in these years, this couple had always been so loving that their faces had never turned red. Mo Xiao's status was there. It was impossible that he had not been tempted by beauty. However, he had never seen Li become jealous. This time, could it be that Mo Xiao really had some thoughts? Su Qingbai's handsome eyes flashed slightly. He smiled and asked, "Prince, you're exaggerating. How could I dare to make decisions on such an important matter? Young Master Feng San, seeing that you're so happy, could it be that you really sent some stunning beauties this time?" The corner of Feng Jiao's mouth twitched. What did he mean by seeing that he was so happy? He said it as if he was some perverted demon. However, seeing Mo Xiao make a fool of himself immediately suppressed the faint displeasure in his heart. He smiled and said, "Young Master Feng San, you don't have to say it. There really is. 2 days ago, Marquis Chong Ningho sent a pair of stunning beauties. Although she couldn't be said to be devastatingly beautiful, she was definitely a rare beauty. More importantly, they are twins. They look exactly the same. Zhuojing Linhan and I looked at them for a long time but could not tell who was who." On the side, Zhuojing rubbed his nose and thought to himself, "Young Master Feng San, you were the one who looked at them for a long time, and you were also the one who could not tell who was who. Can you not drag us, innocent outsiders, into this? We have been specially trained and taught by the Wang Fei. How can we not tell who is who?" Mo Xiao listened to Feng Jiao excitedly introduce the beauties that had been sent to Su Qingbai and Su Qingfeng. Then he looked at Yi Li beside him, who had the same smile as Su Qingbai. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. In reality, he also didn't understand why Li was suddenly angry. However, he knew that it was not purely because of those women who were not even worth mentioning. All these years, Li had never been angry with him. Even if she was occasionally angry, it was more like a joke. However, this time, Mo Xiao truly felt that Li was truly unhappy. But why? Looking at the faint smile on Yi Li's lips, Mo Xiao's heart became even more conflicted and agitated. Calmly turning his gaze to the excited Feng Jiao, Mo Xiao said, "Feng San, you sound so happy." Feng Jiao blinked and looked blankly at Mo Xiao, who was smiling coldly at him. Mo Xiao's voice was slightly cold. "The twin sisters that Chong Ningho sent, I will reward them to you. Even though Chong Ningho's blood is distant, he is still part of the Emperor Shiling's family. At least I have to give him some face. Those twin beauties, you have to treat them well." Mo Xiao said the words "treat them well" in a particularly low voice. Feng Jiao's heart skipped a beat. It was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his excited head. Extreme joy begets sorrow. The excitement of one's superiors was not so pleasant to watch. The ancients did not lie. Feng Jiao thought to himself with a sullen face. Since he had already given away 2, Mo Xiao also thought of how to deal with the others, who asked Li not to like him killing people so casually. But if he left them in the relay station, Li would be in a bad mood. Mo Xiao stroked his chin in satisfaction. He said to Feng Jiao, "Pass down the order according to the merit, reward the women to the generals." To the side, Su Qingfeng and Qin Feng's expressions changed. Su Qingfeng hurriedly said, "That, reporting to Prince, this subordinate does not need it. He was going to marry Tianxiang when he returned. How could he bring a woman back? Even if Tianxiang was not angry at him, his parents would break his legs." Qin Feng coughed softly and said, "This subordinate also thanks Prince for his good intentions." Mo Xiao raised an eyebrow and looked at Qin Feng. "Qin Feng, not wanting it is acceptable, but Qin Feng, do you really not want it? You are already in your 30s, right? You should have gotten married and had children long ago. I remember that one of them is the legitimate daughter of a scholarly family. Why don't I have Feng San give that girl to you?" Qin Feng shook his head and said bitterly, "Many thanks, Prince. This subordinate appreciates it. The prince's excitement was not good to watch. Chapter 691. Qingbai. Emo Shuyao looked at Su Qingbai with a smile. Su Qingbai smiled calmly. Thank you, Prince, for your kindness. Su family's rules are that before marriage, one cannot take concubines before the age of 40 without a son. Emo Shuyao nodded and smiled. I know this. It would be good to bring 2 back to be servant girls. This one has been wandering around for many years. I'm afraid I might offend a beauty. Su Qingbai's smile did not change. After sending away the subordinates who were unwilling to accept the beauty's favor, Emo Shuyao turned to look at Yili. He raised his hand to lift her small face and asked gently, Li, are you still angry? Yili looked at Emo Shuyao with a faint smile and said, Prince, what are you saying? When have I been angry? Emo Shuyao pulled her into his arms and buried his face in her fragrant hair. He said in a muffled voice, Li, don't be angry. You are not happy. I will kill all of those women. When he said kill, Emo Shuyao's tone tightened and unconsciously carried a bit of killing intent. Yili's heart shook slightly. She sighed helplessly and said, Don't mess around. We have just fallen out with the Emperor of Xiling. If we want to settle down quickly, we will be in too much trouble with the local nobles of Xiling. If you kill them all, it will be worse than sending them back. In reality, Yili herself did not understand why she was unhappy. Of course, she knew Emo Shuyao's feelings for her. She also believed that Emo Shuyao was devoted to her. But when she saw so many beauties sent over and saw so many beauties looking at Emo Shuyao with admiration, the displeasure in her heart almost could not be concealed. Perhaps it was because she had never realized before that her husband could attract so many women's gazes and admiration. Even though there had been people like Su Zuidi, noble consort Lu, and even Princess Lingyun in the past, Yili had never thought that these people would bring any harm to her relationship with Emo Shuyao. Perhaps it was because Emo Shuyao's status would become higher and higher in the future that more and more women would be attracted to him. There would even be more and more people endlessly sending all kinds of beautiful women to him. Even more, if Emo Shuyao ruled the world one day, the officials would definitely not tolerate her being the only one in the imperial harem. Perhaps it had nothing to do with these things that seemed so far away. She just felt annoyed and tired of the situation in front of her for no reason. If you don't like them, then kill them. What's wrong with that? Emo Shuyao said sullenly. He raised his head and caressed Yili's beautiful face. Emo Shuyao's gaze was deep and resolute. If those so-called nobles make Yili unhappy, then what's wrong with chasing them all away? Here in the Prince Ding mansion, who dares to say anything bad about I? Yili, don't be angry with me, said. Yili sighed faintly. She leaned into Emo Shuyao's embrace and said softly, I'm not angry because of this matter. Yili sighed somewhat sullenly and said, I also don't know why. I just feel a little frustrated in my heart. Yili also felt very troubled by her uncontrollable emotions. In both her previous and current lives, there were very few times when she could not control her emotions like this. Emo Shuyao raised his hand and touched Yili's forehead. He asked with concern, Are you feeling unwell? Let the doctor come and take a look. Yili shook her head. I'm fine. I'm fine. Maybe I'll be fine in a few days. Are you really fine? Emo Shuyao asked worriedly. However, Yili's expression was normal. It did not seem like she was feeling unwell. I'm really fine. Then, can your husband go back to sleep tonight? Emo Shuyao asked. Yili looked at him for a while. Then she stood up and shook her head. I'm still in a bad mood. So, Prince, please sleep in the study for another 2 days. Seeing Yili turn and walk away, Emo Shuyao's indifferent eyes had a trace of warmth and helplessness. Prince. There was only Emo Shuyao left in the quiet garden. The warmth in his eyes gradually faded and was replaced by coldness and anger. Qin Feng silently appeared behind Emo Shuyao. Emo Shuyao asked with a lowered brow, Has Wang Fei been feeling unwell these past 2 days? Or has something happened that made her unhappy? Qin Feng lowered his head to think. Then he shook his head and said, No. Wang Fei's food, clothing, housing and transportation are all normal. She hasn't encountered anything bad. Even though it was rare for Wang Fei to chase the prince out to sleep in the study, Qin Feng did not think it was anything major. Which husband and wife would not have a temper? Even though he had never married, he had heard some married elders in the military talk about it. Men, it was normal for them to occasionally sleep in the study or kneel on the abacus. Go. Protect Wang Fei. She hasn't been feeling well these past 2 days. Mo Shuyao ordered. Yes, I will do as you command. Reporting to Prince, the Bai family just sent someone to deliver some things. Lin Han came in to report. Mo Shuyao raised his brow. If it was just something ordinary, there was no need for him to come in to report. Lin Han said, the Bai family sent many gifts, including 4 beauties and 4 servants. Lin Han's face twisted when he mentioned the servants. The Bai family was indeed a prestigious family in West Hill. They were more considerate than others. They probably heard that Prince Ding was not interested in beauties, so they took another approach and sent him a handsome young man in the name of a servant. The Bai family? Mo Shuyao's voice was cold. Lin Han nodded and said, yes, the Bai family's housekeeper sent them personally. They even left an invitation for Prince and Wang Fei to come to the Bai family for a banquet. Kill them. Mo Shuyao's eyes flashed with a bloody light. He slowly added, there's no need to tell Wang Fei. You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxiao Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.